Go Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the y'all mean of revolution. Is Trump crazy like a fox? I don't know. Let's find out. What is this all about? He wants to see the gold in Fort Knox. It's not there, Mr. President.
This is the Trump bombshell of all Trump bombshells. What if I told you that Washington is sitting on the greatest secret in American history? No, it's not who really killed JFK. I think we all know which three-letter agency facilitated that. No, it's not what's hiding at Area 51. No, it's actually a bigger secret, something that could change the balance of power overnight around the world. It's Fort Knox, the place that allegedly holds all of America's gold reserves. And what Elon Musk and President Trump are planning to do there would be an absolute game changer. So we'll get there in a second. But first, some context. For over 50 years, the United States government has been playing hide the salami and refusing to let anyone do an audit of our gold reserves. Our government has refused to let anyone even in the front door. I'm talking senators, members of Congress, and more. They've asked to go there. They've been told no. What gives the deep state the right to tell members of Congress you can't go here?
Well, I've been trying to go down and see the gold, make sure it's all there for about 10 years.
Even if it's in your own backyard? It's the same people that tell presidents they're not allowed to know about our UFO crash retrieval programs. It's the permanent deep state government that doesn't work for you or me. Well, that's about to change. So just so you understand, our government claims that inside Fort Knox, the heavily guarded vault in Kentucky, there are 4,580 tons of gold worth $425 billion. That's a massive amount of gold. But here's the problem. No one has actually seen it. No one, not even Kentucky Senator Rand Paul or Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie. No independent verification, no transparency. Just trust us, bro. It's there. Pinky promise. So here's what we do know. The last full audit of Fort Knox was in 1974, if you believe it. That's over a half a century ago, right after we came off of the gold standard in the United States. Now, the government claims we have 147.3 million ounces of gold, but they refuse to let independent investigators verify it. Some believe the gold isn't there at all. Others think it's been loaned out, stolen, or replaced with fake gold bars so that it looks like there's gold there. There are plenty of people who actually believe there's no gold at Fort Knox at all, that our government has been lying to us all along. But guess what? Now that's all about to change because Donald Trump and Elon Musk are about to pull back the curtain on Washington's best kept secret. This weekend, we got a
they'll assassinate them for this type of shit.
Bombshell hint at what they're planning. Elon Musk's Doge is planning a full-scale audit of Fort Knox to account for every piece of so-called gold. Now, this isn't just some random audit. This is the beginning of the end for the deep state's financial control because if they've been lying about Fort Knox, what else have they been hiding? And the people leading the charge of this audit, Senator Rand Paul, Elon Musk, and Trump's new government wrecking ball, Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, which, by the way, liberals by the thousands gathered in Washington, D.C. yesterday to protest Doge because they really don't want government transparency. Well, this Sunday, Elon posted his intention to fully audit Fort Knox, and Senator Rand Paul took the bull by the horns to get to the bottom of Washington's greatest secret. He's been trying to get to the bottom of this for decades. Now, the media's meltdown is already happening, just like they did when Musk exposed Twitter's censorship program or USAID. They're on full-scale damage control. NBC, CNN, The Washington Post. Here's my favorite. Elon Musk isn't qualified to run an audit. Yeah, he's not personally doing the audit. And by the way, who is qualified? Because none of the clowns in Washington, D.C. have run an audit. Who are the qualified people? Can you show me? If there's nothing to hide, why are they panicking?
They are stealing from the American taxpayer, and now they've got their hand caught in the cookie jar, and all they can do is attack Elon Musk.
This is the story the deep state doesn't want you to hear, because if the United States government is lying about the amount of gold at Fort Knox, the consequences would be seismic, earth-shattering, not just for the U.S. economy, but for the entire global financial system, because here's why. It would mean the collapse of trust in the U.S. government. Yes, the U.S. dollar is not backed by gold, but the perception that the U.S. has a vast reserve of gold adds significant confidence to the dollar. and the entire financial system. I spoke to a member of Congress yesterday, a gold expert, who told me if it turns out that Fort Knox is empty or underfunded, the trust in every U.S. financial institution would crumble overnight. Investors, foreign governments, even U.S. citizens would start questioning the Federal Reserve, the Treasury, and every economic report that's issued by the government. So the U.S. debt, which is already at crisis levels, $36 trillion, would look even worse, especially since much of America's economic strength is built on the belief that the government's assets match somewhere its debt obligations. Then we'd face a dollar decline like you've never seen before. And Elon understands this, as he just pointed out that all federal spending is a form of taxation. It has to be paid for either by taxing us or inflating our currency. The government produces nothing.
And as I mentioned earlier, like a very important point that I think is important for people to understand is that all federal spending is taxation. Because what they don't receive, what the federal government doesn't receive in direct revenue, they make up for in inflation. They just print money.
What it spends, it has to take from you and me. And the idea that the government has vast amounts of gold to prop up the government is vital to this equation.
Gold still gives value to the dollar. Yeah. That's why we don't get rid of it. You know, we've got it. The IMF has it. The World Bank has it. Most of the central banks around the world have gold, and it's an implicit trust that the dollar still has some backing.
He's right. And if the world suddenly realizes that the gold reserves aren't real, central banks, global investors could dump the U.S. dollar, leading to massive inflation beyond Joe Biden's wildest dreams. Foreign nations ditching U.S. Treasury bonds, leading to skyrocketing interest rates. And it would drive countries away from the U.S. dollar towards the BRICS nations, which are backed by gold. Then you'd have a mad rush to buy up as much gold, silver, and even Bitcoin as you get your hands on. Gold prices would skyrocket. I mean, they're already at all-time highs. Investors rushing to buy real store of value. Silver, also a monetary metal, could see historic highs. And then crypto, especially Bitcoin, would see a surge as people look for alternatives to the collapsing fiat government money system. And then, of course, there's the Fed. Here's the big one.
After during World War II, the U.S. became the most safe location damn near on the planet because, remember, they wasn't at war on the mainland United States. All throughout Europe was held. They ravaged in Africa. They all throughout Asia. So many nations shipped their gold to the U.S. for safekeepings. You know, it's the safest place. And many nations haven't seen that gold since. After World War II, the U.S. just gave them dollars. You don't need gold. Just here's your dollars. Some of them refused, like Germany. Germany, like a couple of years ago, asked the U.S. they need to get their gold back that you know. That's gone, been gone. They stole Gaddafi gold. They stole billions of gold from Gaddafi, billions from Venezuela. The only gold they have is what they've been stealing lately. What they had after World War II and what the U.S. government supposed to have, man, that is gone. The small hats been stole that money.
If Fort Knox is missing gold, it would immediately expose the Federal Reserve, which has been manipulating gold prices for decades through paper derivatives, essentially fake gold trading on Wall Street. So a full-scale audit would likely prove that the Fed, Treasury, global banking elites have been rigging the system. Guys, it would be catastrophic. And the result? We'd have mass resignations, criminal charges, possibly the biggest scandal in modern American history. And I believe you would have calls to abolish the Federal Reserve or return to a gold-backed currency and stop with all this fake money printing that's not backed by anything. I mean, China and Russia have been hoarding gold while pushing for a gold-backed BRICS currency. And for over a century, America has been the economic superpower of the world. But this revelation could be the final nail in the coffin for U.S. financial supremacy, upending all of Trump's plans. And Trump knows this. He's going to have to deal with the consequences if he wants to be the most transparent president in history. So let's see what's hiding in Fort Knox. Now, if they can prove fraud at Fort Knox, here's what happens next, in my opinion. A full-scale audit of the Federal Reserve will happen. A collapse of the corrupt banking system built on deception. The return of real sound money that's backed by gold. And guess what? Trump has already been talking about it. He's been hinting at a gold-backed dollar. He's been calling out the Fed's manipulation of interest rates. Can you imagine if Trump puts us back on a gold standard? Now, if Fort Knox is empty, it wouldn't just be a financial disaster. It would be proof that the United States government has been lying on an unimaginable scale. So this is the first domino to fall, and the establishment is absolutely terrified about it. That's the news update part of today's video.
Wow, the gold rush of 2025 really is starting to look like some sort of emergency. This accumulation that is going on is continuing. This chart is from Nick Laird of Gold Charts R Us, and it's the published repositories, ETFs, and mutual funds. And you look at the accumulation of gold that has been going on this year, and it is absolutely enormous. This is published in ounces, but there's another even better way to look at this that we're going to take a look at in a moment. But 3 million ounces last week, about 3.4 million ounces the week before, 3.6 or 7 the week before that, 3.1 the week before that. This is just absolutely enormous. However, Nick also presents this data in a slightly different format. This is the weekly cash flow. So it's how much currency is flowing into this market. And you're talking about $8.9 billion last week. This is like a whale, there's speculation, or whales doing this accumulation. But 8.9 billion. So here we're talking right about 10 billion. 10.1 or 10.2, 8.5 or 6, something like that. So this is just enormous what's happening. You take a look at the dollar flows for the past couple of years, and you'll see about a billion maybe is the average, not 8, 9, 10 billion. And so Glenn Beck, I'm not a big fan. He advertises a precious metals company to get your bullion there. And when you call them, they'll try their hardest to switch you over into some really overpriced collector coins. I had a client of mine buy a whole bunch of gold from them, and then the price of gold doubled, and he called to sell it back, and they only offered him a third of what he paid. And so I don't like that. But in this video, Glenn is speculating that this could actually be the US Treasury or the Federal Reserve doing an accumulation. Why? Well, there's a lot going on here. Is gold missing from Fort Knox? I don't know why everybody focuses on Fort Knox. It's not the only place that the US stores gold, but everybody does. And anyway, the odds that it's missing are put at just 9% now, which seems very low. So people are betting that there isn't gold missing from Fort Knox. However, it could be that by the time there is an audit, there won't be any gold missing, if Glenn Beck is correct. So who is confirming that gold wasn't stolen from Fort Knox? Maybe it's there, maybe it's not. That gold is owned by the American public. We want to know if it's still there, and this is from Elon Musk. U.S. Senator, I've tried repeatedly to get into Fort Knox. Fort Knox, you can't come to Fort Knox. Me, why? And then show more. So breaking, Rand Paul on Fox News this morning, gold is going mainstream. Doge preps gold reserve audit after Rand Paul invites Musk to review. And that is, this is Zero Hedge. Let's do it. Rand Paul supports Fort Knox physical audit. Again, Fort Knox. So why Fort Knox? Well, there's the last audit of Fort Knox was in 1974, and it wasn't an audit. The U.S. Treasury opened just one of the 15 vaults and showed what might be roughly 6% of the gold that's supposedly stored there. So where is the gold? This is the Department of Treasury Bureau of Fiscal Service report on government gold reserves. And this is from February 28th, 2021. But I like the format that they presented in. And I went and downloaded the most recent format, which is very, very difficult to read. And nothing much has changed. So the summary is that gold bullion and then gold coins, blanks, and miscellaneous gold equals this many troy ounces and 11,041,000,000 at the statuette price, which you'll see in a moment is just absolutely silly. But there's Denver Mint, Fort Knox, and West Point. So that's the deep storage gold. And out of the 245 million ounces, 100,000 million, 245 million ounces, 100, less than 150 is at Fort Knox. The balance is at these other 2 points. But then there's the working stock for the for U.S. Mint, and then Federal Reserve held gold. So this is at the bank, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and then their display. I've been to their they call it a money museum. It's a money and currency museum. There's a lot of money in this museum. Gold coins, the Federal Reserve vault, New York Fed vault, and then the display upstairs, the part of that currency and money exhibit. This is the amount that is money, and the subtotal. So you've got Federal Reserve held gold out of the total government gold here. So, but what's more important than that, why would the government want to accumulate gold?
This is Dabu 7. We have what might be the biggest fraud in history unraveling in front of us. Now that Doge is diving into all these different departments, and there's a lot of different questions attached to that and what they're doing and what's really going on. But now that they've dove into Social Security, they are uncovering, again, what Elon says could be the biggest fraud in history. They're saying that there are over 20 million Americans collecting Social Security benefits that are over the age of 100.
No, that's impossible.
And when you go even further into this, there are benefits still being paid out to people that are over 140 years old.
Scams.
It's absolutely mind-boggling what all is going on here. So he puts this information out there saying that this is the case. Of course, people from the other side saying that they want proof to all this. They have launched a website that shows all the stuff that they're uncovering, where you can click and you can go into detail on everything that's there. One of my biggest questions is, when are the people responsible for all this crime going to go to jail? It seems like a big magic trick. They're coming out and they're telling you about the biggest fraud in history, whether it's this or it's the next story or whatever it is. They're uncovering it left and right. And I guess no one's going to get in trouble.
They've been scamming in government all this.
There's no talk of it. You gonna let Biden walk away, pardoning himself for all the crimes of the Biden crime family? I mean, this goes back decades, not just on one president. All these crimes go back decades. People should be held responsible. Will they, though? To me, it seems like a big illusion here. I'm still waiting for Hillary to go to prison, but Trump don't want to do that. So your Gentile Messiah and Mr. Baphomet here, Elon, ripping through all this stuff and tearing down a bunch of departments. On the outside, things look good. It's a whole lot of winning. But with the other hand, they're sliding in the blockchain and everything else. And some just don't get it. But with this is a big find, regardless of how you look at it. When you look at this many people getting paid out, this is as fraudulent as it gets. And it may be one of the biggest in history. Join me on the live show where I break this down further. Going live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern.
What's up, everybody? I was just about finished with a video about central banking going back to the Roman Empire, and I heard about this and had to jump on and scoop it. But you know the famous story of Julius Caesar and how 60 co-conspirators all walked by and had to give them a poke to prove their loyalty. Well, it turns out that that happened because he kicked out the usurers and changed the monetary system. Go figure. It turns out changing a monetary system is very bad for your health. And the latest rumor is that Musk and Doge are possibly swimming in some dark waters here. Now, this is all just rumor at this point, and this is basically all everybody's going off of. But Zero Hedge posted, it would be great if Elon Musk could take a look inside Fort Knox just to make sure that the 4,580 tons of U.S. gold is still there. Last time anyone looked was 50 years ago in 1974. Musk replies, surely it's reviewed at least every year. Yeah, that's cute. So look, I keep saying this. It all depends on how far they're willing to go with things. The fact that Trump has been completely willing to look the other way about the Eastern Mediterranean situation definitely makes me think that they're not going to go all the way where they need to go. But right now, I'm just along for the ride. I'm
Because it's the small hats.
not going to make any predictions, and I'm not going to jump to any conclusions. They've been hinting at auditing the Pentagon and the Federal Reserve, and that's totally something I'll believe it when I see it. But, you know, in the last 6 months, I'm right there where Jimmy Dore says he is. And he's been saying for quite a while now that if Trump actually gets elected, if they can't stop him from being elected, then I'm going to have to rethink the entire power structure that I thought I had figured out. Because everything for the last 40 years has been pushing towards the Klamata-Chang world order. And he's the only one that has pushed us away from that. Actions speak louder than words. So I know a lot of people say they're all in on it together. You're going to have to explain how that works out to their benefit to me. Because a month ago, they had an unlimited slush fund that went to sowing all kinds of chaos, overthrowing duly elected officials in other countries. There's been a lot going on lately, so I don't know if you heard about this, but they also shut down the National Endowment for Democracy. And here's a former officer saying instead of having intelligence going around behind the scenes, nowadays they have a sidekick that just does all of this out in the open. And we all know how America likes to go free the living crap out of people and spread democracy. But look, now all of these piggy banks are getting shut down. RFK said the other day that medical journals need to be on high alert because they might be facing RICO charges. And we all know that television and mainstream media has been their main weapon. But who is it that funds all the television channels? Yeah, people like this. So look, all of this is going to take some time. Right now, I'm blown away at how much has actually happened in the first few weeks here. So I'm just doing the play-by-play, not making any predictions. But it's the start of another week. I'm sure we're going to be hearing about all kinds of new stuff this week. And just keep in mind, it's going to take time for the process to play out. Don't expect to see everything overnight. I'm surprised that we're seeing anything this quickly. They're not playing around. But here's the latest rumor going around. A series of social media exchanges between Elon Musk and others has ignited public discussion about the gold reserves at Fort Knox, which reportedly haven't been audited since 1974. The conversation began when Zero Hedge's X account suggested that Musk take a look inside Fort Knox to verify the reported 4,580 tons of U.S. gold reserves, prompting Musk to question whether the reserves weren't reviewed annually. You know, sometimes I can't tell if he's just being sarcastic or if he's really that naive about things. But, you know, if it's something you've never considered before, I'm sure he worked it out really quickly, and it's probably sarcasm. U.S. Senator Rand Paul joined the conversation, expressing support for a potential audit with a succinct, "Nope, let's do it," in response to Musk's query. Okay, so check this out. I just did a video the other day about Lee Zeldin talking
This
about
is a direct threat to. See, this is where you just gotta. It's some deep chess being played here by Trump and Elon because they know they're going at the small hats. Ain't nobody else controlling the money supply of America but the small hats. When you're talking about auditing anything, you're getting in their business. This is some. Like I said, Trump crazy like a fox because he who else is he going at? He going at the small hats with these type of moves. And that's a fact. It's different fractions of the small s, but he going at the ones who trying to control the money supply in America.
The figurative gold bars being thrown off the Titanic at the end of the Joe Biden administration, 20 billion parked in an offshore account. But now we're talking about actual real gold bars. Scottsdale Mint CEO Josh Fair says they have been flying gold into the United States out of Europe and mainly London on almost every flight starting before Christmas. And he estimates there were approximately 4 tons per passenger flight when cargo space permits. Fair suggests several possible scenarios behind these gold movements: potential preparation for an upcoming audit, repatriation of U.S. gold previously stored at the Bank of England, strategic positioning in response to gold accumulation by BRICS nations, and part of a larger central bank deleveraging process. So if the gold's already there, which it totally is, then why did they start flights moving gold bars from London into the U.S. right after Trump got elected?
That's stolen gold from London. I just told you they stole Gaddafi. Gaddafi had billions in gold, the U.S., and he messed up and started storing with Europeans, trying to get back in their good graces to do business, and they seized it, billions in gold. Also, they stole 1.something billion in gold from Venezuela. While all that was considered when Trump getting gangster with Venezuela, yes, they had $1 billion worth of gold in London. They stole that. You see, they can't fool us with this new gold. Anybody who expects this gold can look at it and just, see that it's not the gold that's supposed to be sitting in the vaults of America. This is freshly stolen gold.
So the last last supposed audit was in 1974, and this was it. It was a televised piece of propaganda, just to call it for what it is. And you guys have probably seen this, but it's probably the cheapest camera they could find back in the 1970s, to where you can't even read the name on the door. And they got a handful of congresspersons, the media, and went down and put on a good show to reassure the public everything's fine. Now, first off, how dumb is it at the height of the Cold War to take all of your golden eggs and put them in one basket here, to where one nuclear can vaporize all of it? Look, we've got hundreds of miles of hollowed out limestone for underground storage. So if there is a storehouse of gold somewhere, it would be somewhere like this, and not out here with a big sign saying, hey, here's all our gold. But they've always insisted that it's here. In 1974, they took the cameras in. They showed the plaque on the door saying that there's 36,000 gold bars in here in vault number 33. And this is back when the public was completely clueless about these things, but the people that knew watching this were like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. But they open it up and, they're all in awe. There's gold stacked to the ceiling. You can see it right there. That's definitely gold bars on the sketchy camera. I wish I could play the video, but this is the kind of thing that gets you CR'd. But they just snatch up a gold bar like it's a donut, which those things are really freaking heavy. And what's up with the discoloration there in the middle of this solid gold bar? Gold doesn't tarnish. It doesn't react with anything. It's gold. But they just pluck one up and set it down on a scale that a guy is holding. It's not even in a steady position. They just throw it down on a scale and say, see, it's gold. But to me, this looks like some Wizard of Oz, follow the yellow brick road gold. There is no stamp on there whatsoever. There is no markings. And this has a really dull sheen to it. I mean, the reflection of his thumb and his hand doesn't come through very clear. And I mean, real gold looks like this. What can I say? This is a bunch of real gold with markings on there explaining where it came from, which pretty much all gold in circulation has some kind of mint stamp, some kind of identification saying that it was weighed by this mint. And just like our currency, I think most of them have serial numbers, which would make a lot of sense if you're actually trying to keep track of this kind of thing. But these are real gold bars, and then these are Fort Knox totally real gold bars. So I don't know if they're going to do it or not, but you want to talk about waking the public up in a big way, go down there and see what's in Fort Knox. Just the fact that they're scrambling a bunch of flights in with loaded with gold right now kind of tells you what's really going on. So it's just rumor right now, but it'd be cool if that happened.
It's just Trump. The small hats tried to assassinate him. They shaking him down, trying to force him to do shit. He just playing hardball back. Like I said, there's nobody else. When he get in the small hats business, they control our currency. They control the Federal Reserve. So when you talking about pressing them, you going to war with the Zionists. That's a fact. So who knows? It might be another assassination attempt. You're talking about auditing the Pentagon, you going at them.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to World Affairs in Context. The Pentagon has once again failed its annual financial audit. As a former auditor myself, I reported on this last year here on my channel when they failed their 2023 financial audit. Now, once again, the shocking news is revealed and we find out that their 2024 financial statement audit did not go well. According to the official 2024 audit report that was issued by the Department of Defense Inspector General Office, quote, the audit resulted in a disclaimer of opinion, and I will explain to you what that means. It's not good news. We were unable, the auditors are telling us, to obtain sufficient, appropriate audit evidence to provide a basis for an audit opinion. Accordingly, we did not express an opinion on the financial statements. It further reads, as a result of unsupported beginning balances, which means that the auditors did not have any assurance whatsoever that the balances reported in the beginning of the year were correct. Auditors could not confirm the completeness and accuracy of the amounts reported on the financial statements. Therefore, this increased the risk that the financial statements will be materially misstated. As a former auditor and as a CPA myself, this means that the financial statements could not be fully audited due to a lack of evidence supporting documentation such as expense reports, invoices, financial statements, lack of consistent reporting practices by the government, and a lack of compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. And I will get into more details shortly in this video. In recent weeks, calls to audit the Pentagon have been gaining momentum. This is long overdue, and it might be safe to say that just like with US aid, covert operations, and revelations that shocked all of us in recent weeks, there is no telling just what may be revealed if a competent, independent audit is performed. Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency are planning to investigate the Defense Department's budget and to see why the Pentagon, year after year, believe it or not, year after year, consistently has not been able to pass a financial statement audit. This is a basic procedure, and it really shouldn't be an issue. Donald Trump said that he would consider cutting the defense budget in half once things, quote, settle down with Russia and China. That statement clearly contradicts comments made about investing in national security, of course. So while everything is still up in the air, auditing the Pentagon appears to be a logical next step after the USAID scandal. The Pentagon is notorious for failing every single one of its financial audits. And of course, you won't find, and I say this as a former financial statement auditor who's been involved in many, many audits of publicly traded companies, you will not find a publicly traded company here in the United States that is as incapable as the Pentagon has been when it comes to transparent and honest reporting on its expenses. The audit results speak for themselves. Now, let's get into the details of the Pentagon's audit. The department completed its 7th annual consolidated financial statement audit, covering approximately 4.1 trillion with a T, trillion dollars of the department's total assets and $4.3 trillion in total liabilities. The audit comprised 28 standalone audits. And so to put that simply, it means that it had 28 parts. And they were conducted by independent public accounting firms and the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General. The DoD OIG issued a disclaimer of opinion on the department's 2024 consolidated financial statements. This means, attention, it was unable to obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence on which to base an opinion. Just a year prior to that, in 2023, if you've been following me for a while, Pentagon did not pass its annual audit as well, and I have an entire video on that with details. Pentagon did not pass its annual audit of $3.8 trillion back then. There were significant errors and a lack of documentation that auditors issued negative opinions on back then, and now it's happening again. What's even more concerning here is that this was not the first time that it happened. Not following regulatory requirements and standard accounting practices essentially became a norm for the Pentagon, since continued audit failures show a complete lack of accountability and responsibility. Now, let's get back to 2024 audit report. I want to show you several important details that you may want to know about. The audit report reads, of the 28 reporting entities undergoing standalone financial statement audits, only nine received an unmodified, which means clean or good, audit opinion. 3 of them are still pending, which is extremely odd at this point in time. And listen to this, and 14 components received bad opinions. These are your disclaimers and qualified opinions. If this was a public company, you would want to run, not just walk, but you would want to run away from this. You would not want to invest in a company like this because it means that they're not following standard accounting practices. They don't know what's going on. And frankly, you would have to question whether this is intentional or not. So if you had investments in such companies, you would need to cash out as soon as you can, take that loss and just run away. In my 10 plus years of auditing Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies, I have not seen any publicly traded companies here in the United States. We have a very, very regulated environment, but I have not seen a publicly traded company in the United States receive a disclaimer of opinion. And that is what Pentagon received back in 2023 and now again in 2024 for the 2024 fiscal year. It means auditors were effectively prevented from performing their audit procedures because the client, in our case, the Pentagon, failed to provide all necessary data and documentation. Typically, a public company such as, let's say, Microsoft or Nike or Apple, it pays millions of dollars for an annual audit. And it is an industry standard. That is not an exception. The Department of Defense is no exception here as well. The DoD paid $187 million for its audit back in 2023. And that was actually a reduction from $218 million that the Pentagon paid in 2022 for its audit. This is, of course, taxpayer money that is just being spent on meaningless procedures that everybody knows will result in a bad opinion. The auditors will say, look, we're not even getting enough audit evidence to perform our procedures, but of course, we'll take your millions. If this was a public company, I will say that once again, they would face serious issues with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and other regulators. But of course, the Pentagon has been given a free pass year after year. What's really interesting is that on November the 15th, 2023, the Pentagon's controller commented, if even one large component of DoD, such as a military department, does not have an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion, in other words, it's mathematically impossible for the entire department to have one, he said. So given where we are, he says, this was not a surprise. The controller is basically telling us, yeah, I'm not surprised that we keep failing our audit. And, I do find the comment to be somewhat unusual for an accounting controller, for a finance controller, because his entire job is to ensure that the audit goes smoothly, that the auditors do receive what they want, because they're not asking for anything unusual. Auditors typically ask for documentation that is basically a standard for any accounting and finance process. So they're not asking you to create anything. They're just asking you to produce what you should already have available. And so, of course, that appears to be not the case here. Auditors basically wrote in their audit report that they were not able to even obtain the basics, the bare basics, to ensure that the opening balances were complete and accurate. Yet this was allowed to go on year after year, and here we are in 2025. We just received those 2024 audit results, and we see that things aren't really changing, that the Pentagon keeps failing its audit. According to an article that was published on Stars and Stripes, direct quote, "The Pentagon has never passed the yearly audit. The first audit only became federally required in 2018, and the department has been trying to pass them every year since." Additionally, there are claims that Congress is getting quite frustrated with these failed audits, as they should be. I'm surprised it's taking them this long. And Congress even made an attempt to start penalizing the Department of Defense for failing an audit. Congress has become increasingly critical of the Pentagon's failed audits, and some lawmakers have even proposed punishment if the trend continues. A bipartisan group of senators raised the Audit the Pentagon Act, which would penalize any military component that fails the annual audits and force it to surrender 1% of its budget. Lawmakers have previously but unsuccessfully attempted to pass similar legislation. However, as we know, nothing has transpired. Now, if you've been through a financial statement audit once, you know very well what to expect next year. It's fairly predictable. It's very, very simple. So to say that the documentation wasn't available is quite unusual. And that is never taken lightly. It's never taken as an appropriate excuse in a public company environment. Those companies that you typically have in your 401ks, publicly traded companies, this type of an excuse is never, ever acceptable. We don't know what the reason is, of course, in this particular case, and I'm not going to assume, but I would expect auditors to be provided with all contracts, all expense reports, asset listings, sale listings, inventory listings at their first request. And those are easy to produce, and there's absolutely nothing that auditors ask that is not already part of a standard finance and accounting set of procedures, as I mentioned previously. So as I said, it is not clear what the reason is for yet another year of a failed audit. I think we all understand what the reason may be, but I don't want to assume, and let's just wait for USAID style revelations, hopefully at some point this year. If you're not familiar with how an independent audit works, by the way, here's a quick background. An audit is performed by an independent public accounting firm. It covers financial statements, and it also covers controls over financial reporting, such as, for example, other appropriate approvals prior to military equipment being purchased or disposed of. Is it purchased from a related company, a company that somebody's family member may own, or was there a fair bidding process, as is the normal practice in government? So those are the type of things, among many, many others, that auditors verify. In this particular case, we're being told, according to the official audit report, that auditors were not able to obtain the evidence. Typically, public companies are required to address issues identified by auditors. Pentagon was given a free pass, so they spend millions of your tax dollars to pay for an audit report, to pay for an annual audit that they knew they would fail. Let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Feel free to share the video. I think the more people
Island. Go to jimmydore.com for the link for the cheapest tickets. Hey, you want to know how to coup a country? So here's Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut. He went to the steps of USAID to tell the truth about how USAID protects America and the real reason Elon Musk wants to shut it down. You want to hear this garbage? Listen to this.
Elon Musk has been floating all sorts of awful, terrible conspiracy theories about what happens at USAID. Let's make it very clear that every single day, America is safer because of what happens at USAID. USAID fights terrorist groups all across this world, making sure that we address the underlying causes.
That's crazy, bro. It already proved that USAID funds the terrorists, pays the terrorists. This is disgusting. We proved that. And remember, another U.S. congressperson, I just played that yesterday or the day before, exposed them. You paid Boko Haram. You paid Al-Shabaab. You paid ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Come on, you funded them. Act like you was taking humanitarian aid into those areas and it's weapons, rocket hell grenades, boatloads of cash. Man, get the hell out of here. Then here go this Democratic clown right here pretending like, no, we was doing some good in those areas. This is disgusting, bro.
This is for a retreat to terrorism. USAID chases China all around the world, making sure that China doesn't monopolize contracts for critical minerals and port infrastructure all around the world.
What?
It supports freedom fighters everywhere in this world. Up until yesterday, delivering firewood, for instance, to the brave Ukrainian defenders on the Eastern Front.
What? Not see, freedom fighters.
So that's the kind
of the Nazis. Azov Brigade in the right sector, racists who say they fighting on behalf of the white race. Never forget that in Ukraine. This guy here looked like he liked that type of shit. We're giving them firewood. Yeah, you gave Hitler firewood too, nigga.
Kind of great stuff that USAID.
It ain't just I'm saying to help Hitler. It's a fact that American companies, banks, IBM, Ford Motors, you know, the Nazi war machines was Ford tough. Come on, bro. These same clowns like his back in the day was helping Hitler. Now they helping the Nazis. Talking about free. You see how you said freedom fighters? Oh, you bastard. That's called ISIS and Al-Qaeda.
D does. Hey, you want to know what they really do? How far is the United States willing to go to block African collaboration? Here, in this video clip, Mike Benz revealed that a destabilization training initially published by the U.S. 1st Special Forces Command. Well, let's just play it.
Everyone can look this up if you're listening right now. In 2021, the U.S. Special Forces Perspective, under Mark Milley, our chairman of the Joint Chiefs, put out an entire instruction manual for how the U.S. military can work with the State Department and our intelligence services to organize a rent-a-riot, to destabilize a country in order to bring them to the negotiating table. They gave an example of a hypothetical West African country where a member of U.S. Special Forces is on a separate mission, driving down a highway, and notices a billboard for Chinese infrastructure investment into a new port in this Western African country. The unit takes note of this billboard on a highway in Western Africa with Chinese symbols on it. They do their own investigation and figure out that this is part of a real estate development project from Chinese investors that as part of that development project will have the construction of a Chinese naval port in this West African country, where in theory, China would then be able to project naval influence in the Atlantic Ocean. What the Special Forces Guide calls for is coordination with the State Department, coordination with our intelligence services, coordination with our psychological operations unit to take all of our assets in that West African region. And in that case, what they did is they planned to work with the unions. What they did is they embarked in a social media influence campaign. They would activate all their media assets, all of their civil society institutional assets, and all their union assets to have the union labor pool in that West African country. Well, actually, there was one thing that happened first, is they first then went, in this hypothetical, the State Department sent a delegation to persuade the West African country to forbid the development license to the Chinese developer. And the head of that West African government said, said no. Because something was happening in the hypothetical in the next 30 days, there was a time sensitivity to generate an instability event to stop this using time-sensitive emergency. And so the way they generated that was they worked with their union contacts in the region and the media contacts in the region and created this whole social media campaign to inflame the sentiments of the West African labor union workforce who were working for Chinese companies at the time. Because in this hypothetical, the Chinese mining firms and Chinese industry was employing a lot of these Africans. And it was to destabilize the country, to bring the mines, to bring the factories, to bring all of the Chinese production in the region to a halt, and to put all these Africans out of jobs, and to bring the African government effectively to a standstill. At the same time, in their own Special Forces manual, it called for support from U.S. aid to provide these same striking miners alternative jobs, so that while they were striking from the Chinese labor companies, they were still getting paid by U.S. taxpayers. So they were financially bribed effectively to boycott Chinese industry and to devastate their own country's government, create this crisis, and then use the State Department delegation to go back to the negotiating table with the West African government and promise to end the destabilization if the development was halted. And in that hypothetical, the West African government then rejects the license for the real estate development of China, and that is declared as an unalloyed success by the U.S. Special Forces and their partner network in the State Department and Intelligence. And this is the way of our diplomacy in 2021. And this is all publicly available if you look at the Special Forces prospectus. And when this goes live, I'll post this on my X account at Mike Ben Cyber so that you can, don't take my word for it.
So that's what USAID does. It creates instability. It uses millions and millions of your taxpayer dollars for propaganda through social media, through invented newspaper and news outlets that are there only to push propaganda, to destabilize, to cause riots, to destabilize other countries so we can force our will on them. And not the will of the United States citizen, the will of the economic hitmen who actually run USAID and the CIA and our government. Here it is. Confess. Ever wonder how the United States subverts democracy and the aspirations of other countries? Well, here's a guy who's going to tell you. Here's the economic guy who was an economic hitman is going to tell you.
We will identify a third world country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. But the money never goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our big corporations to build infrastructure projects, power plants, highways, industrial parks, things that benefit a few very rich people in that country, as well as our own corporations, but don't help the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity, don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks, don't own cars to drive on the highways. And yet those very people, the whole country is left holding a huge debt so that it can't pay for education and social services and healthcare for its people. In fact, the debt is so huge by intent that at some point we economic hitmen go back and we say, listen, you owe us a lot of money. You can't repay your debt, so sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies without regard to the environment. Vote with us on the next critical United Nations vote. Send troops in support of ours to some place in the world like Iraq. And in that way, we've created this empire. On the few times when we economic hitmen fail, as I talk about in the books, as I failed in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos and in Panama with Omar Torrijos, then the jackals go in. And these are men, maybe a few women, who overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. And if the jackals fail, which is what happened in Iraq, both the economic hitmen and the jackals failed with Saddam Hussein, then and only then does the military go in.
So that's how this works.
So wait a minute. All these like terrible dictators we've heard about for all these years that are paranoid and they're trying to purge people because they think the U.S. has spies out there to get them. That's because they're in the jackal phase, and is that what that is?
That is right. You are correct, Kirk. That is what they say.
That is not a joke. That's a straight fact.
That is not a joke.
Come on, I'm serious.
Serious. U.S. troops pull from Chad and Niger as the African nations question its counterterrorism role. So whatever you think about Elon Musk or Donald Trump, you will know them by their fruits. So right now, the fruits are they seem to be dismantling this type of U.S. government imperialism around the world. That's what it looks like. It looks like Donald Trump is going to leave Europe to defend itself against the Russia, which Russia has no interest in invading any of their countries. But Trump is going to do all this garbage with Israel and Gaza, which I think will be the undoing of his presidency. We'll see. It's certainly everybody says, no, he's not planning on doing any of that stuff, he said, Jimmy. He's just bluffing to get a better deal from Hamas. Well, they slaughtered 200,000 of them. Isn't that enough they flattened all of Gaza? Isn't that enough? He needs more to get a better deal from Hamas? No, he's just rolling over for Israel. We're going to get to that story. But
Adelson. It was the last wishes of Witta Adelson.
Yes. So when you hear Chris Murphy say stuff like he just said, he's a garbage person who is selling out the U.S. public. And of course, he's pushing actual fascism. And when fascism comes to America, you think they're going to say they're fascists, or you think they're going to say they're fighting fascism? That's what he's saying. We're over there helping the good people of Ukraine fight against Russian No, you're over there. First of all, the people of the government of Ukraine is fascist. They banned all the political parties. Vote. They banned all the opposition media. What's that, Kurt?
They're not having elections.
They don't have elections.
So they're taking burning down the churches.
Yeah,
it's back to Soviet style stuff now.
The exact opposite of what they claim to be, of course. And so you have people, these pieces of garbage. There's Jamie Raskin. I was supposed to do a story about his wife is completely corrupted, and with USAID, and so that's why he's defending it. These are all garbage. This is what's wrong with the government. That's
the mafia.
It's all a mafia.
That manual is standard Italian mafia.
That's right.
Oh, you want the union trouble to go away?
You want your union trouble to go away?
It couldn't be more obvious. That's what it is. So this is like don't you care about the family? Like, well, fuck all of you.
Hey, look,
I understand. I don't like Elon or not like him. I don't know the guy. I don't care about him. I think he works for Trump. I don't think Trump works for Elon. I don't believe that. I've never seen Trump not fire people when he wanted to fire people, ever. Where's Vivek? He's still been missing.
You're fired. Get out of here. You're fired.
Yeah, we should play that sound clip effect when we want people fired from now on. I mean, honest to God, I don't, when you do something I want, great. That's great. I don't care about your feelings or your anything. I care about what you actually did.
Yes.
So I don't trust any of them like they're Jesus Christ. I wouldn't recommend anybody did that.
A few hours ago, the reputable American magazine, The National Interest, published an article in which military experts and analysts of this magazine bluntly stated that the war in Ukraine was over, and that Russia had emerged as the absolute winner in this war. Furthermore, the experts from this American magazine acknowledged that the Russian army defeated not just Ukraine, but also the North Atlantic Alliance. According to them, Ukraine would not have lasted even a month if NATO countries, including the United States, had not provided Kiev with unprecedented financial and military assistance. And despite this, Kiev and the North Atlantic Alliance never managed to inflict a strategic defeat on Moscow. Although Donald Trump has not officially announced this, the Russo-Ukrainian war is over. The main losers in this war are Ukraine and NATO. Undoubtedly, the whole world will perceive Russia as the main winner in this conflict. Given the fact that Ukraine wouldn't have lasted on the battlefield for even a month without the military support from the United States and other NATO countries, it would be naive to believe that Kiev would get a place at the negotiating table. Ukraine, as the losing side, can only accept the conditions of the winner. And despite all the objections and discontent of Ukraine, the Kiev authorities will have to accept all the conditions of the winner in the face of Russia, the American expert said. The fact that Ukraine's defeat in the current conflict is also a NATO's defeat has also been recognized by many European politicians. According to them, the current Munich conference has become a vivid example of the fact that February 2025 marked the beginning of the end of not only the North Atlantic Alliance, but also the European Union. This fact was especially evident after the shocking speech by US Vice President James David Vance, where he not only criticized European democracy, but actually declared war on European globalists. This speech by the US Vice President has already been compared to Putin's speech at the Munich conference in 2007. Back then, during his speech, Vladimir Putin called on the globalists to stop before it's too late, and for the sake of ensuring world peace and stability, adopt the concept of a multipolar world based on justice and law. However, back then, the globalists did not listen to Putin. As a result, the world got a war in Georgia, Ukraine, and it devastated Europe. What will happen this time? Whether globalists listen to the US Vice President's words, only time will tell. In any case, no matter what anyone says, it seems that Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are creating some kind of alliance in their common struggle against the globalists, who have ruled this planet for decades under the infamous policy of divide and rule. Against this backdrop, Europe, which has become a faithful representative of the global liberal globalist network, is seriously preparing for a protracted confrontation not only against Vladimir Putin, but also against Donald Trump. In this regard, globalists have begun to gather numerous summits to develop a plan of action in the current situation. One such summit was held on Monday in Paris, where European countries, including Britain, were trying to figure out exactly how they should act against Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, on February 17, a number of European and American think tanks stated that Ukraine and Europe were hoping in vain that Russia would make some concessions during the upcoming negotiations. According to them, the numerous victories of the Russian army on the battlefield and the possession of the initiative in all key directions of the front give Moscow quite powerful levers of pressure on both Kiev and the West. Experts from these European and American think tanks expressed confidence that during the negotiation process, Russia will not only make even minor concessions, but may even put forward new demands in order to further humiliate the Kiev authorities. By the way, the preparation of the negotiation process is in full swing. Furthermore, Russia and the United States have even begun to prepare a platform for a meeting of Vladimir Putin with Donald Trump. In particular, a few hours ago, Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov officially announced that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Russian presidential aide Yuri Ushakov would meet with representatives of the U.S. administration in Saudi Arabia on February 18th. According to him, during this meeting, the parties will discuss the restoration of relations between the two countries, the resolution of the conflict in Ukraine, as well as the organization of a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. It is reported that the meeting of the two presidents may take place in late February in Saudi Arabia. Against this backdrop, the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, in order to save his worthless life, began begging Donald Trump's friends to help him improve his relationship with the US president. For this political clown flew to the United Arab Emirates and met with President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who has a very warm and trusting relationship with Donald Trump. However, unfortunately for Zelensky, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan refused to put pressure on Donald Trump. Instead, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan severely humiliated the head of the Kiev regime. In particular, he accommodated Zelensky and his wife in the four-star Moscow hotel in the center of Abu Dhabi. It became quite symbolic, especially considering the fact that this clown received a crushing defeat from Moscow. On February 18th, humiliated and insulted, Zelensky flew to Turkey. This clown hopes that at least Recep Erdogan will be able to convince Donald Trump to change his attitude towards the head of the Kiev regime. Commenting on Volodymyr Zelensky's humiliating attempts to save his own skin, authoritative political analyst Sergei Markov said that this is the beginning of the end of the head of the Kiev regime. According to him, no one will help Zelensky anymore, and that his days are numbered.
It's over for Zelensky and the Nazis and Europe.
Meanwhile, Russia has already begun to behave like the winner of the current conflict. Russia's permanent representative to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, officially stated that Moscow would not allow EU countries and Britain to participate in the negotiation process on Ukraine. According to him, the criminal Russophobic policies of these Western countries have led to the fact that they have completely lost the ability to conduct a dialogue and negotiate. The Russian diplomat also recalled that it was the EU countries that gave guarantees for the implementation of the Minsk agreements. However, instead of fulfilling the agreements, they blatantly lied and continued to arm Ukraine. Furthermore, Vasily Nebenzia also warned Britain and Europe that if their puppet Volodymyr Zelensky tries to disrupt the negotiation process, Ukraine will lose even more territories, and that in this case, Russia's terms will become much tougher.
Thank you. Yes.
We're hearing that Russia wants to force Ukraine to hold new elections in order to sign a
They really
humanitarian
pissed.
deal. Is
Now the
that
fake news, they really pissed at the statements that Trump finna make. Now I was shocked too. I was like, come on, this is a Saturday night live skit, but no, it was real.
something that the U.S. would ever support?
Well, we have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, or essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but
He just calls Zelensky a dictator, bro. That's serious business, and he finna keep going.
he's down at 4% approval rating.
4%.
And where our country has been blown to smithereens. You got most of the cities are laying on their sides. The buildings are collapsed. It looks like a massive demolition site. The whole, I mean, so many of the cities. I mean, they haven't done it in Kiev because I guess they don't want to shoot too many rockets in there. They've done it 20%, but they haven't done it 100%. If they wanted to do it 100%, it would probably happen very quickly. But you have cities that are absolutely decimated. And yeah, I would say that, when they want a seat at the table, you could say the people have to, wouldn't the people of Ukraine have to say, like, it's been a long time since we've had an election. That's not a Russia thing. That's something coming from me and coming from many other countries also. Ukraine is being just.
He just said Zelensky is illegitimate. He just said you haven't had no elections. He said that's not coming from Russia. That's coming from me. This ain't Putin saying Zelensky illegitimate, because Zelensky been disrespecting Trump last couple of days, making demands. So Trump came out and said, "Oh, well, I will tell you this. It's your fault the war happened. You should have never started it, and you should have accepted the deal." Trump absolutely said that.
Just wiped out. Look at what's happening to the cities. There are cities, there's not even a building standing. It's a massive, you talk about Gaza. I mean, it's literally, these cities look like Gaza. Actually, many have percentage-wise more buildings knocked down than in Gaza. So, people are tired of it. People want to see something happen. And, the other thing that it's been bothering me for a long time, because I solved the problem with NATO. They paid hundreds of billions of dollars into the funds of NATO when I said you got to pay, because the United States was paying for European countries, and then they take advantage of us on trade. But I've seen it. Look, they have to pay. They have to find out, where's the money going to? We have, I believe President Zelensky said last week that he doesn't know where half of the money is that we gave him. Well, we gave them, I believe, $350 billion, but let's say it's something less than that, but it's a lot. And we have to equalize with Europe, because Europe has given a very much smaller percentage than that. I think Europe has given 100 billion, and we've given, let's say, 300 plus. And it's more important for them than it is for us. We have an ocean in between, and they don't. But where is all the money that's been given? Where is it going? And I've never seen an accounting of it. We give hundreds of billions of dollars. I don't see any accounting. So I want to see peace. Look, you know why I want? Because I don't want all these people killed anymore. I'm looking at people that are being killed, and they're Russian and Ukrainian people, but they're people. Doesn't matter where they're from on the whole planet. And I think I have the power to end this war. And I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal.
You should have never started. But Trump said they whining, Europe and Zelensky, talking about, oh, well, we don't have a seat at the table. He said, you had 3 years. I just got back in office. And now you whining because I got Putin to sit down. I told you peace was coming, but I was surprised he said that. Then he said, you shouldn't have never started it. You could have had some peace in the beginning. That's crazy. Trump was telling him that. And remember, he said this at the beginning. This is not Putin. I'm saying it. But he's saying exactly what Putin was saying.
For Ukraine, that would have given him almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land, and no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue. What he was so bad for this. It was so bad, so pathetic, so sad. But with all of that being said, look, it is what it is. When I left, there was no chance that this could have happened, but it happened because we had incompetent leadership at many different levels. But when you see what's taken place in Ukraine with millions of people killed, including the soldiers, millions of people killed, a big percentage of their cities knocked down to the ground. I don't know how anybody even lives there. You know, when they say they took a poll and Zelensky's at 4%, who's living there? You know, I mean, it's hard to believe that people live there. Their cities are being knocked down. And this is something that would have never happened. And by the way, for 4 years, it didn't happen. It was never going to happen. Go ahead.
Follow-up question. How
Warmongers have met in Paris, and peacemakers have met in Riyadh. How those debates turn out is going to, I think, change the geopolitical landscape of the world. A tectonic shift is underway right now, and how these two meetings turn out and what results as it comes about as a result of them, I think is something that is going to profoundly change the world that we have. And folks, it ain't going to work out the way some people think. And there's a lot of folks at high levels that are not prepared for the changes that are now being foisted upon them. Now, we're going to start off in Riyadh, where the United States and Russia met for the first time officially since before this war began. The United States was led by the Secretary of State Rubio. The Russian side was led by their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. After the meeting was over, we got the first hint of really what all this was about and what we can expect to come when Secretary Rubio outlined 4 outcomes from this meeting today.
We've agreed on 4 principles that I think are important. The first is that we're going to appoint our teams respectively to work very quickly to reestablish the functionality of our respective missions in Washington and in Moscow. For us to be able to continue to move down this road, we need to have diplomatic facilities that are operating and functioning normally. The second point is that we're going to appoint a high-level team from our end to help negotiate and work through the end of the conflict in Ukraine in a way that's enduring and acceptable to all the parties engaged. The third point is to begin to work at a high level as well, to begin to discuss and think about and examine both the geopolitical and economic cooperation that could result from an end to the conflict in Ukraine. Obviously, we have to see that conflict come to a successful and enduring end in order for that to be possible. And the last thing we agreed to is that while our teams are going to be working on all of this, the 4 of us who were here today, the 5 of us that were here today, are going to remain engaged in this process to make sure that it's moving along in a productive way.
Now, this meeting was ostensibly to talk about ending the Russia-Ukraine war. And the fact that it existed at all is a testament to just how significant things have changed in the United States and ergo in the Western world. You may recall that we showed on our channel some number of months back a soundbite of then Secretary of State Blinken, who was asked if he had talked to Sergei Lavrov anytime soon. And he mocked that, well, I mean, I talked to him on the side of a certain meeting, but that's it. I mean, we're certainly not going to talk to him, as though that was some measure or mark of elegance, as though that were strength somehow, like that to dare to talk to the Russian side is like looking down my nose. And of course, I wouldn't do that. That was always an absurd thing to do, and has harmed international relations, has harmed American interest abroad. It has kept the risk of conflict between Russia and the United States alive when it should have been taken off the board a long time ago. And perhaps most consequential, at least in the near term, is it has resulted in hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian men to be killed, whole sections of their country handed over to or taken, not handed over, taken by the Russians, and entire cities literally turned to dust. That is the enduring legacy of the Biden administration, and by extension on the Western world, because the rest of NATO fell in line, the rest of Europe fell in line. Nobody would talk about Russia. Nobody would talk to Russia, rather. Everyone instead just took the easy path and demonized Russia. So we held that up as an element of something that's sophisticated, that powerful. That's what strong people do. They don't talk to their enemies. They wait until they come to us on their knees. Well, that would be fine if that's the way it worked. And it used to be the way it worked. And I think probably part of the reason that it was that way is because that's how it was earlier, especially after the Soviet Union dissolved, that the U.S. could just literally tell people what they wanted to do, and they would either do it or we would tell them pound sand. I mean, George Bush was a famous one for that. He blew off both our own allies in Europe and definitely just ignored the heck out of anybody in Russia with NATO expansion, with the war in Iraq in 2003. I mean, we made enemies all over the place, but we were so powerful and strong, we just frankly didn't care. So we did whatever we wanted until they came to us, and they always did. It's not 1990 anymore. It's not 2003 anymore. It's now a completely different situation here. And if anybody needs any more notice other than the fact that they met, it's also what he talked about there. So as I said, the conditions there, entry level, where everybody's like, all right, here's the first discussion to end the Russia-Ukraine war. But now that you see that the two sides seem to be talking about a whole lot more than just the Russia-Ukraine war, and in fact, that only had about 25% of the mention. He said that they wanted to appoint teams to reestablish functionality in the embassies. So he says, all right, we're going to not just have this one conversation. This is the start of a reconnection of normal relations, diplomatic relations between one of the world's biggest economic and military powers. It's just normal relations. So that's number one. And that was mentioned first, and that's important. Second was that they're going to appoint a team to end the Russia-Ukraine war. Appoint a team. So it's almost like, oh yeah, and this thing about this war, yeah, we're going to get somebody to talk about that very soon, and we'll get back to that. Anyway, moving on, then they move to number 3, which is, this is probably the most important one. Examine the economic and geopolitical cooperation that could result after the war is over. This should be ringing loud and clear all over the Western world. The United States and Russia are already mentally moving beyond the Russia-Ukraine war. And the Trump administration is putting behind it everything that the Biden administration worked so painfully to destroy. I mean, let's be honest about it. And the fact that not only did we never talk to the Russians, we never had any kind of an achievable military plan, diplomatic, economic, or otherwise. We just had actions that we threw out there that just kept the war going. We kept Ukraine having enough weapons to prevent a rapid defeat, but there was never enough weapons that we could have sent that could ever have changed the outcome for Ukraine victory. Some have claimed that, well, Biden just gave things in dribs and drabs, and if he had just given everything all at once, then Ukraine could have won. No, listen to me. This is so important to understand, because a lot of people claim that. Like, this is a result of the failure of the Biden administration. The loss is not a failure of the Biden administration. It was always ordained. If Biden had done that, let's say that in 2023, instead of giving them the small number of tanks that we gave for the U.S. tanks anyway, and a limited number of other European tanks and whatever, we'd given them hundreds, plural, of the M1 tanks, the Challengers, the AMX-10s from France, the British tanks, the German tanks, all that, like hundreds of them, enough to outfit 7, 8 different armored divisions. And somehow we had managed to actually train up the troops in a way that they could have used them. This is hypothetical, because there would, even if you'd given that ammunition and equipment, their troops would never have been trained enough well to use them. But for the moment, let's say that did succeed. If they started driving Russia physically out and driving them back to their country, we almost certainly would have had nuclear war. Joe Biden knew this, by the way. There is evidence out there in the public realm that they knew that, and that's why they didn't give them enough stuff to take that risk. So Biden didn't want to risk getting into nuclear war. He didn't want to risk getting into war with Russia, but he did want to keep the fighting going to, quote, weaken Russia. Now, as I've told you 100 times, and we'll do it one last time here, not only did we not weaken Russia, Russia is now stronger than it was militarily before, substantially stronger. And that is going to be something we need to deal with for a long time. But the bottom line is that this absurd path that we had been on was self-destructive for Ukraine, and it was catastrophic for our own interests, because now every Western European country, to include the United States, is now their military capacities are weaker today than they were before, because so much of their infrastructure was handed over to Ukraine to be destroyed on the battlefield. So we're weaker than we are today. We have fewer air defense missiles. We have fewer air defense systems. Some of our strategic reserves and tanks and armored personnel carriers, Bradley fighting vehicles, artillery systems, etc., those things are now much smaller than they were before. Our inventory of artillery ammunition significantly weakened across all of NATO. In the event that we would get into a war somewhere, our own stocks are now insufficient just to meet our defensive needs, let alone actually sustaining a long-term war. So everything that had been done up to this point has been a disaster for the Ukraine and for the United States. So it is long overdue that we have a big change in what's going on. And now it appears that the United States and Russia are going down that path. because the war, even though Russia is stronger, they don't want to fight a war. There's a lot of other things they would prefer to do. And according to their own assessments, they would like to have peace, and they want to have security on their border, and then they want to do business with people around the world. They want to have economic prosperity for their own people, et cetera, and they can do that best in the absence of war fighting. As it turns out, so can we. We benefit from this. Western Europe would benefit from this. Getting this war off the table is good for everybody, with the possible personal exception of the leaders of the Western countries who have supported these bad policies, and definitely for Volodymyr Zelensky himself. But for everybody else, and that includes everybody in Ukraine who is alive today, would benefit from this war coming to a rapid and quick close based on the realities on the ground. And it's going to be ugly, folks. There's no good way to put it. I can't put lipstick on this pig. It's going to be ugly. But an ugly end, keeping everybody else alive, is a great thing, and something that we ought to be pursuing aggressively, as it appears that we are. But everybody in the West needs to be sober-minded to understand it's going to be an ugly pig with no lipstick. That's just all there is to it. And yet, that's what we should pursue, because if we don't, something worse could be following. But now, one of the other things that's kind of in the news right now that a lot of people have been talking about both yesterday and today is that, well, we are sidelining Volodymyr Zelensky, one of the key guys that's involved in the war. The leader of the two sides that's involved in the war with Russia and Ukraine is not even at the table in Riyadh. What's up with that? Well, Rubio had a bit of a claim that wasn't the case, but then he kind of actually said it was.
No one is being sidelined here, but President Trump is in a position that he campaigned on to initiate a process that could bring about an end to this conflict. And from that could emerge some very positive things for the United States, for Europe, for Ukraine, for the world. But first, it begins by the end of this conflict. And so the only thing President Trump's trying to do is bring about peace.
And the only thing Zelensky wants to do is to prevent peace. Look, I know that's a thing that gets a lot of people unhappy, but I mean, those are the facts, folks. He doesn't want to end the war. He wants to continue the war, because if he ends the war, then his power is almost certainly going to come to an end, because in any scenario that the Russians would agree to, it's going to have to require the Ukraine side to conduct a presidential election. A lot of talk already is that maybe we can get to an end of war declaration or through negotiations, possibly by April. More on that later. But then there would have to be an election, so that Russia wouldn't sign any kind of an official document until maybe October, when there would be an election, the results of an election, a presidential election in Ukraine. Because as you may know, Zelensky's term of service came to an end, and I think it was May of last year, and they've had no more elections. So his constitutional term ended, and he didn't leave office, and he didn't have another election. And people can say, well, they're on martial law, and so they shouldn't do it in wartime. That's irrelevant to the conversation. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. They didn't, is the bottom line. And there is legally nothing that's going to say he's obligated, or that anyone subsequent to him would be obligated by anything he would sign, because it would be, obviously very easy to say he was not the legitimate leader at the time. So Russia says, we're not going to do that. We're going to make sure that whoever signs this on the Ukraine side is authorized on their own constitution to do it by their own means. So Russia's like saying, whoever wins, wins. We don't care. It could be Zelensky, but it will be somebody who is legally the leader of their country. So that's what they're saying. That's what the United States seems to be agreeing with, because there's lots of talk that they're also saying, yeah, if it's a democracy, and especially if we can get the fighting stopped so that they can fairly conduct an election, yeah, we're for that. We're supposed to be for that, because that is democracy. One person who may not be for that, though, is Volodymyr Zelensky. So he was actually in Ankara today, in Turkey, talking to Erdogan, the leader there. And he was asked in the post-briefing press conference what he thought about not being in Ukraine.
Можете обговорювати що завгодно, але не можна приймати рішення без України, як завершити війну в Україні. Ті чи інші умови. І нас не запрошували на цю зустріч, російсько-американську зустріч в Саудівській Аравії. Для нас це було сюрпризом, я думаю, так, як і для багатьох. Я переконаний, для України, для нашого регіону, для Європи принципово, щоб будь-які перемовини щодо закінчення війни відбувались не за спиною у ключових суб'єктів, яких зачіпають наслідки російської агресії. Мені здається, на сьогодні зрозуміло, що зброєю на полі бою в цій війні не переможе жодна з сторін.
Okay, a few things are really important there. Number one is he said that we were surprised that we were not invited to Saudi Arabia for these meetings. Yeah, but was he? Could he have been surprised? I mean, if you've just been reading headlines around the world, forget about if you've been actually reading stories and watching the news, etc. Nobody should have been surprised that Ukraine wasn't invited. The meetings had been set for a long time. The conversations that were in Europe and in these meetings in Munich with all these leaders, it was talked about there that we're going to talk to the Russians. But Trump has been saying for a long time that he's going to talk to the Russians. He had a conversation already for a long time that he's talked to the Russians, that he was going to set up the meetings that would eventually lead to Putin and Trump themselves to be able to meet, etc. Everybody knew that that was going to happen. Everybody knew that Zelensky was not on the invite list. And in fact, it was a big sore point during the meetings in Munich. We've shown you in some of our previous episodes some of the moderator questions to General Kellogg saying, wait, so you're saying that you're going to have a meeting in Saudi Arabia and Europe's not going to be there and Zelensky's not going to be there? And he said, that's correct. He goes, so Ukraine will be involved, but there's only going to be two protagonists. So he point blank said before he left Munich, Kellogg's did, that there would only be two people talking in Riyadh. So now then, how can you have today Zelensky claiming, well, we're as surprised by this as anyone? That's obviously untrue. It's just point blank untrue. So that's one strike against him already. Then he says, none of this stuff can be done behind the backs of the people who are there, meaning Europe and Zelensky. And listen, we have to be honest here. And sometimes, it's not a movie to where you have to be polite. It's not, a formal event where you have to be kind to somebody, maybe if you don't like them. When you're talking about life and death, when you're talking about the potential for things escalating into the point to where there could potentially be a nuclear war, that's not the time for politeness. That's the time for frankness and forthrightness. And as I alluded at the beginning of this episode here, there is a 3-year-long track record that Europe and both in the previous administration in the United States were abject failures in everything that led up to this point that we're in right now. All of these losses that Ukraine has had on the battlefield were all predictable. They were all, I called virtually every one of them, and it's no great benefit to me, nothing special. I'm just willing to look at the balance of power between the two sides, at the military fundamentals that are involved on the actual battlefield, etc. It's easy. It was easy to call. And yet, all of these senior people, all of these heads of state of NATO who met in Paris under this big emergency meeting that they had yesterday, all these people were the culprits. They were the architects of all of this failure. Now, why would the incoming Trump administration and the Russians, who are the primary protagonists, because without the United States, none of this war would have been supported. It would have ended long time ago. So we have kept it alive, and we can bring it to an end. So if you're talking about these two protagonists here, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, why would they want to have an equal seat at the table? The guy who had made the worst political decisions and diplomatic decisions in Volodymyr Zelensky, who at least on 4 major occasions ejected diplomatic end to this, that he could have either prevented the war from starting or ending it after it did start in a number of places, and has refused every time. Why would that guy, the same guy who went on Piers Morgan and said, hey, give me nuclear weapons, the same guy who, after Pete Hegseth said that NATO is not on the table, said NATO is still on the table. That guy, why would you want him in a meeting with you when you're going to discuss what's coming next? You wouldn't, because he can't act rationally. He can't. And the European people, even though they are rational actors, but they have this mentality that says only conflict with Russia. Russia is evil, period, point blank, end of story. You can't negotiate with evil, all that kind of stuff. Why would you want them at a table where you're trying to come to an end of the negotiation to end the conflict? Now, Europe has always been following behind the United States in the last 80 years, since the World War II was over. That's just been the reflexive way of things. And I'm sure that's going to work out here too. As a matter of fact, we had Gary. I'm going to give you a little bit out of order here. I'm going to go to Keir Starmer next. He made a statement last night where he said, as he was heading into this meeting in Europe, that he understood that some things were different. In this clip you're about to see here, the first thing he's going to talk about is that the U.S. delegation to Munich said that there's going to have to be a lot bigger carry and a heavier lift by the European NATO members than there has been in the past. So he's going to address that first, but then he's going to talk about what he thinks should come next in the Russia-Ukraine war.
The issue of burden sharing is not new, but it is now pressing. And Europeans will have to step up, both in terms of spending and the capabilities that we provide. On Ukraine, we're at the very early stage of the process. Europe must play its role. And I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement. But there must be a US backstop, because a US security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again. So I will go to Washington next week to meet President Trump and to discuss what we see as the key elements of a lasting peace.
Now, interesting things here. So the first part, he has conceded, yes, Europe has to do more for NATO. So we're going to have to step up that spending. But then he says, but we still need troops on the ground to keep Russia from attacking into Ukraine in the future after some kind of an agreement is met. So they're still thinking the Russia only in the always evil, always trying to be Hitler, trying to go to, to the Paris or something like that, driving all the way across Europe, all this nonsense that's been said from the beginning. It's never been true, but they keep saying it. He's still kind of in that mindset. But you see, it's changing. You see there's a shift, because he said, yes, I'm willing to consider, not that he declared, using British troops. And then he also said, but even if we do that, none of this stuff is going to work unless we have security guarantees from the United States for Ukraine. And I think it's pretty clear there's not going to be any. There will be no security guarantees from the United States for Ukraine. The United States, President Trump wants to end this war. He wants to get it off the table so we can get to the things that Rubio just outlined are the most important things for him, which is an improvement and back to normal relations with the nuclear superpower in Russia, so that we can have stable relations and positive and peaceful conditions within Europe, within our allies there. We also want that. But it's not going to be going down the old path, which was an utter disaster. It's going to be going down the new path. And at the end of that, he said, and I'm going to be going to Washington next week to talk to Trump. Wonder how that one will go. So that coming out of the warmonger group, all these 8 European leaders who have been doing nothing but wanting to keep the war going the entire 3 years before Trump came in there. And I assure you with all conviction, had Kamala Harris won instead of Trump, all of them would still be singing the same song they had for the previous 3 years. We have to double down. We have to keep going, etc. So now then there's, as J.D. Vance said, a new sheriff in town. And so there's going to be a new set of rules. And if Europe is going to be following the United States, then they're going to have to follow in a different direction, because these guys are still trying to go in a different direction. Now, the fact that you've heard almost nothing coming out of Paris, where the warmongers met, tells you that they are probably coming to recognize, as we heard Keir Starmer admit here, maybe that path isn't the best one anymore, and we're willing to consider alternatives. And I very highly suspect that when it comes to Washington, he's going to be singing a different tune than he was last night. We'll see how that works out. But somebody who's not going to be singing a different tune and will be singing the same tune is the Russian side. And Sergei Lavrov addressed one of the issues also, I think, yesterday that Keir Starmer raised here about the possibility of having a negotiated settlement that includes Western troops.
I really don't know what they have to do at the negotiations table if they still want to trick the conflict into freezing for a while. while staying true to their habits of continuing the war, then why should they be invited to the table at all?
So you see that from the Russian perspective, why should that he said they, and I think in that context they meant both Zelensky and Europe. That he said they've been nothing. All of them have been nothing but suggesting a military conflict from the beginning. So if someone's negotiating it in, they don't have any place in that. But on the specific issue of the troops that are involved, he added this:
deployment of armed troops from NATO countries under any different flag, under an EU flag or under national flags, doesn't change anything. It's unacceptable to us.
And listen, folks, again, we're in power politics here. There's no right and wrong. There's no this person's morally correct and this person's not, because those things don't matter. Not for war and peace, they don't matter. Obviously, morality matters tremendously amount in anything that you're doing and how you conduct your affairs and how you live your life. But war itself doesn't care about that. It doesn't care who is right. Somebody could be absolutely 100% morally correct, true, proper, and good. But if the other side has the balance of power on its side, and we've seen this unfortunately happen many times in history, that side will win a conflict and it will defeat the good side. That's just a fact. And so when we're talking about how should we end this war and how can we get it off the table at the least cost of life, at the least cost available on any category for the Western side, we have to acknowledge ground truth reality. And right now, the ground truth reality is that Russia is irrevocably on the power side, on the advantage. And that advantage grows by the week. It keeps getting stronger and stronger while the Ukraine side shrinks on a daily basis as well in the opposite direction. So the balance is continuing to shift. And we see that playing out even on the battlefield there. After about a 2-week it wasn't a pause actually, but a slowdown in the Russian advance here in the last 48 hours. It's picked back up, and in some areas it's accelerating even what it was before this slowdown that had happened. So everything is continuing to fall apart on the front lines here, and the longer this goes on, the greater the risk and the possibility that the Ukraine army could collapse and it could fall apart. So you can see time is not on the Western side. Time is not on the United States. It's not on Trump's side. It's not on Europe's side, NATO side, Zelensky's side. It's not on our side, because if we keep holding out for something that's unattainable, and you have Sergei Lavrov telling you this idea of having peacekeeping troops that are Western troops, that are many of them are NATO troops, it's a complete non-starter. They won't even contemplate it. So they won't have any kind of an end of fighting negotiated settlement if that is something that we're pushing for. And if we keep hoping for that and saying, no, we're going to keep it on the table, then Russia's going to go, okay, you can keep it on your table. It ain't coming to my table. And we'll just keep doing what we've been doing, which is fighting on the front lines. We'll just continue to move to the west. The longer you wait to come to an agreement, there won't be any dividing line. Just look at any map right now. Go to the Institute for the Study of War. Even though they have terrible analysis, they got great maps. And it'll show you where the front line is right now. So go look on where that is today. And especially if you watch this at some point in the future, take a look at where the line will end up. Because we could have a negotiated settlement right now by just saying, all right, we accede to reality. We're going to get this off the table like as fast as possible. And we're going to agree to Russia's minimum terms that we can live with, which they're saying, which Putin has said from 14 June. We've talked about that a lot of times. If we don't, and if we say, but we want peacekeepers, Western peacekeepers as part of this thing to separate the two sides, then Russia will just say nope, and we'll just keep going to the West. And until that finally comes into reality, then that's where it's going to end up, and there'll be a whole lot more people dead, and there'll be even less Ukrainian territory left under Kiev control. That's just the reality of it. But it's not just the Europeans who can't seem to come to that reality. You have one of the biggest, most popular figures in America, former CIA director, former four-star general, David Petraeus, seems to be even more disconnected than they are.
There has to be a security guarantee. I can't imagine that Ukraine could agree to anything that did not include a robust security guarantee. The question is, what could be in it, just beyond a military response? Could it include, for example, automatic seizure of the $300 billion of Russian assets sitting in European banks? Could it include an automatic path to NATO membership for Ukraine. All of this in addition to whatever
This clown.
military action might be taken by probably a coalition of the willing. In an ideal world, it would be a NATO operation.
Russia wiped
led
y'all
by
ass
an
out.
American 3-star, let's say, with a core headquarters that is then built into a NATO coalition headquarters with lots of European and U.S. assets.
That is just stunning to me. That you have this former 4-star general, somebody that we once thought was so smart, we put him at the head of the CIA.
He lost the Iraq War.
Actually is saying now, not just that there should be some non-aligned Western troops or even from some third party outside of Europe, possibly. Russia wouldn't go for that, but you could say, well, but they're not going to be for either side, et cetera. He's going so far as to say a NATO mission on the border with Russia with an American command in the auspices of NATO. And he thinks that's plausible. That is insane. Russia went to war because of the prospect of having NATO on their border. And you think that they're going to allow any kind of a situation that would insert NATO-backed troops on the physical border with Russia? It is beyond absurd that he would even suggest such a thing. All that's going to do is make Russia fight harder and push more. And short of the introduction of foreign troops, not just support, but troops, there is no possibility that the Ukraine side by itself can prevent Russia from conquering even more territory, even if it takes a long time, even if they continue fighting and dying in large numbers, they can still shovel more people into the breach there. But who's that going to benefit? All that will do, folks, is increase the cost of this war for the Ukraine side. It will increase the cost to lose. The war has been concluded in terms of its outcome. We know it. Russia won. The Ukraine side, backed by NATO, lost. It's abhorrent to say, and I get it. I don't even like to say it. I feel some embarrassment myself and some shame from it.
Feel some shame
because I was served in the United States Army. I served in Europe, so I was part of NATO forces.
We lost to the
and it's embarrassing to me. And it's a mark of shame that this once powerful and brilliant military organization that used to be filled with a lot of wise people who made good decisions that kept us safe has descended to the point now where they can't even see basic reality. And of course, this extends all across the Western thinking. There's actually a piece, let me show you real quick, in the Kiev Post today that's written, that says opinion present.
Russia had to humble these fools, man.
And as you read this, he says, Trump is destroying the foundations of unprecedented peace, security, and prosperity the United States essentially built 80 years ago and has enjoyed ever since. And folks, listen, that mentality is part of the problem here, because these folks, they can't see that it's not 80 years ago. Even when I'm talking about when I was serving in NATO during the Cold War, before the USSR fell, that's how far back I go. I started in 1985, the first time I was in a NATO organization in the European continent, for fighting for serving in the U.S. Army. We were fighting then, and that's when it was preserving the peace. It was doing really good work, and it had been since 1949. It had kept the peace. And this guy's thinking, though, it's still 1949. These viewpoints of people saying, yeah, what was done for the last 80 years should go on for another 80 years. That's what they think, even though, and here's where they have their fatal flaw. They can't get that it's not 1949 anymore. That we just finished a catastrophic global war where 60 million people were killed, and vast portions of Europe were just laid to waste and just destroyed, and that the Western countries that emerged out of it were badly weak. They had lost millions of their men, so that their human capital was badly damaged, and it would take a generation or two to build back up, etc. That's not the world we have today, folks. So why should you have a security architecture today that mirrors what existed in 1949 when the conditions today are radically different? Now then, you have a whole Europe. You have rich cities. I've spent a lot of time in Europe. Love going there. It's a very modern place, great culture, wonderful food. It's a great place to go. They can afford. There's nothing that's worse in Europe that's better in the United States. I've been around here too. And in some cases, you can even argue that they're more modern and better, certain things in Europe than there is here. But in any case, they can afford the same things that we can. And if they think their security is at risk, then they can take the appropriate measures to have the security forces that they need. But see, these people think, no, we need to keep NATO just like it was 80 years ago forever. And so they can't undo that. But David Petraeus, it's fatal. He can't get out of his mindset that it's not 1949 anymore, or not even 1985 anymore. But it is. It is past that. And now then there's new realities, and we need to acknowledge that. So we have to move forward into something else. Now, I've showed you at the outset of this what the U.S. side said after the meeting with Russia. Let me show you what the Russian side said, because there's some things to be optimistic about here, and some real possibilities that things could get better if I can find that. All right, I'm going to have to do something different. Sorry about that for the minute, folks. Let's see. I think it's this one right here. There we go. So let me pull that back up. I truly apologize. I thought I had it all set up. But this is good, because this shows that Russia is also saying, hey, we're ready to do some good things here too, because they want the war to end. These are some of the comments. This is RIA Novosti, by the way. This is converted into English on Google Translate, just so you know. You can do that if you want on your own. It says this is what the delegation said. And some of the key things here are that the delegations were engaged. This is from the Russian viewpoint afterwards. This is what they published. Delegations were engaged in establishing relations between the two countries. This was, quote, quite successful. So they're already coming out of there saying this is successful. And what you're going to see here, by the way, is not that Russia's secretly trying to set the stage, as was claimed in Munich last week, like it's 1938 Munich, that they're just trying to get rid of Ukraine so that they can come crashing down on everybody else in Europe. That's ridiculous, and it's absurd, because the Russians are saying that's not what we want. We don't even want that. That's not even aspiration. As it was for Hitler, by the way, in 1938, he had aspirations on the rest of the continent, and everybody knew it. That is not the case here, and the things that Russia's coming out saying prove that, or at least give evidence of that. I guess it's a better way to say it. The negotiations felt full determination, concrete determination to promote relations between the countries in an active way. So what you're going to see written through many of these things here is basically all four of the points that Secretary Rubio said. So you have, coming out of this meeting, both sides saying basically the same thing. We want to improve relations with each other. We want to see peace brought to Ukraine, and we want the war to come to an end so that we can get back to, having relations that can make everything better for all the different parties. And one of the key things I thought that it's important to point out here, because it was something that was mentioned before, and that was, I'm sorry, that's the American side that was saying here. See, this and this is again something echoed by Rubio. We agreed that we will take into account each other's interests, but at the same time promote bilateral relations. Both Moscow and Washington are interested in this, said the presidential aide. They also said that, which we saw Sergei Lavrov say there a second ago, they reiterated here, and this is really important. Russian representatives told the American delegations that it was unacceptable for Moscow to have NATO troops in Ukraine, even if they were under the auspices of a European Union with foreign or other national flags. So the Ukraine, or the Russian side, reiterated, among all the positive things they said, they reiterated that there's not going to be any kind of troops in here, because that's not something that's useful and something they simply won't tolerate. If we press down that road, then the war will continue on. So I want to leave you with this understanding here that is so important for everybody to understand. If these delegations move quickly, that the current line of contact or something close to it can be where the war comes to an end, or more appropriately, the four administrative borders of the four oblasts: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. That's the minimum that Russia will even talking about. And there's many voices in Russia, by the way, which frankly hope these negotiations don't succeed, because they want any kind of excuse to keep fighting. There is a definite hardline view in Russia right now. And you need to understand this too, that does not want a peace to happen here. They don't want Putin to be successful here, because they want to be, quote, forced into continuing to take on the ground what they want for their national security. And they're willing, and they are definitely able to do it. We definitely should not put them in a position to have to prove that. It is in America's vital national interest. It is in America's national interest, and it is in Ukraine's vital national interest to get this war off the table as soon as possible, whatever Zelensky thinks. And if it comes down to it, where Zelensky says, I don't care what you say, Mr. Trump, I'm going to keep fighting, then I think that Trump should be ready to do the really hard thing, because it'd be hard domestically as well as internationally. Just say, okay, you're a sovereign country. You're the head of the country. You can do what you think is in your best interest. I'm going to do what's in my best interest. We will no longer from this day forward provide any more weapons, ammunition, or support. Any personnel we have in your country will be withdrawn back to our forces, and we will wish you luck. And then we'll see how it goes from that point forward. Because as abhorrent as it may sound to my Western friends, to do anything besides that, to continue the fiction that we're going to support Ukraine, to be unwilling to have the tough concessions necessary to end the war where it is now, will almost certainly result in hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainian men being killed, and the line going, we don't even know how far it could go, up to the Dnieper River. It could include Odessa. It could include Kharkiv City. It could even put the Kiev itself back in the crosshairs again. All those things are possible if we don't reach a negotiated settlement right now while we have the chance. That's how important this is, and that's what is on the table here right now, what we need to be careful about. Thank you very much for watching today.
Thing, right? Well, but here's the kicker. You'd think, but Ukraine isn't invited. Europe isn't invited, and that's making a lot of people very nervous, including Erdogan of Turkey, who says he wants a full return of Ukraine's territory, and what he says is a Russian land grab, which is not up for discussion. He's like, nope. So any land grab has to return to Ukrainian pre-2014 territory. Who knows? Crimea included, I guess. Okay, so just so we're clear, Turkey just invaded northern Syria and is now controlling Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and many other Syrian cities. So hypocrite much? Okay. Anyway, here's the meeting, and you can see Marco Rubio here sitting at the table. And you've got members of the Saudi delegation there, as well as Sergei Lavrov of Russia. I mean, it's unbelievable that this wasn't allowed to happen over the past few years. No one from the Biden administration called, no discussions at all.
Oh, no, but I will remind you that the Biden administration went to peace talks facilitated by Zelensky that excluded Russia. So the people who are super nervous right now that Ukraine was not involved in these peace talks, they were totally fine when Russia was excluded, even though, in Switzerland,
Right.
several times over the last couple of years. Those people seem to be very inconsistent about that. Also, I just couldn't help but wonder that Marco Rubio sitting there, I wonder if he floated his idea with Sergei Lavrov that the Russians blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Which is
He
something
has
he said
gone
before.
on record saying that. He looks very nervous as he sits there with these Russian officials, that I hope they don't bring up that bullshit that I said on CNN. I was just saying it on TV.
I mean, Marco Rubio, again, we've been very critical of Marco Rubio here on the show. He's been, it seemed like he teamed up with Victoria Nuland, pushing, discussions about the biolabs in Ukraine, the Nord Stream pipeline boondoggle. He's openly been, pushing for war with Iran. Now it seems like he's like a peacemaker. So, okay, is he really doing the bidding of President Trump? We hope so. We hope he's not undermining him, and hopefully that he's carrying the pail for Donald Trump, who wants peace right now. So he now is openly, and Rubio is now openly advocating for a U.S.-Russia partnership. Something that Bill Clinton scuttled many, many years ago when he decided to push NATO right up to the wall of Russia, saying America needs to take advantage of the incredible opportunity to work with Putin geopolitically, economically, and on issues of common interest. Listen to Rubio.
But ultimately, the Russian side will be indispensable to this effort, and so that process will begin. And then the third is, together with those other two, is beginning to engage in identifying the extraordinary opportunities that exist should this conflict come to a acceptable end, the credible opportunities that exist to partner with the Russians geopolitically on issues of common interest, and frankly, economically on issues that hopefully will be good for the world and will also improve our relations in the long term between.
Wow. What?
Now, many are reporting that Zelensky has said, we don't recognize this. Zelensky is saying he personally no longer feels supported. His feelings are hurt by this. He thought the U.S. was his boy. He's very confused. One of the conditions that came out of this meeting was that Ukraine would have to hold elections, which Zelensky canceled 2 years ago, saying the Ukrainian people, they don't want a new leader. They like the war they've got. They've liked the leader they've got. They're cool with the way things are. And so now he is absolutely fuming. He was supposed to go to Saudi Arabia himself, but once he realized that he would not be invited to the adults table at the negotiation of peace, he abruptly canceled his trip and said no deal gets done without Ukraine. But how can he continue the war without the money and support of the United States? Now, here we have, at the very least, the Trump administration admitting this war was started by the United States and it needs to be finished by the United States. Zelensky has no power, no money, no troops, and without the United States, he has no support. So what's he going to do? Fight it himself? Clearly not, although he's always dressed for it. So there's that, right? European leaders are also losing their minds. Macron is holding emergency meetings in Paris. Scholz is warning that peace can't happen without Europe. Ursula von der Leyen said, we need an emergency freak out mentality. That's what she said on X. We need an emergency mentality. This is serious. We need to, she's inviting us all to collectively panic. You can, if you want to. I remind you that she's not elected. So you don't have to follow her into any emotions if you don't want to. Meanwhile, the United States and Russia are calling these talks constructive. Marco Rubio and Sergei Lavrov sitting at the same table. There's even chatter that this could set the stage for a Trump and Putin meeting, which both of them have discussed, President Trump said. So is this actually a step forward when it comes to peace? It's a story that's moving fast, so stay with us all week.
Yeah, I love that Zelensky had to cancel. It's like, I'm not going to those. I wasn't invited, so I wasn't invited, so now I'm not going.
I also am not going. Should I take to Twitter and announce that?
Yeah, you should take to Twitter and announce that you're not going, even though you weren't invited.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll do that. Every important event, I'm going to announce that when I have decided not to go, when I've not been invited.
You know, the problem with these huge tech companies is they don't want your money. They want to know everything about you. Shadowy data brokers make a living compiling detailed profiles of your online activity, and then they sell them to marketers and other corporate interests that want to control you with targeted ads. They're not selling a product, they're selling you. But you don't have to let them. There's a great way to keep your browsing history truly private, and we use it every day here on this show. We couldn't do our show without it. It's an app called ExpressVPN. One of the easiest ways for data brokers to track you is through your device's unique IP address, which also reveals information about your exact location. With ExpressVPN, your IP address is hidden. That makes it much more difficult for data brokers to monitor, track, and monetize your private online activity. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network traffic to keep your data safe from hackers when you're on public Wi-Fi. The other day, I was out at a coffee shop, and I was using ExpressVPN because there's no way in the world that I want my private information on an open Wi-Fi network, especially if you're doing banking or just, surfing the web or doing work. You don't want that information out there. ExpressVPN works on all of your devices, your phone, your laptop, your tablet, you name it. Just tap one button, turn it on, and you're protected. It's that easy. Find out how you can get 4 months free by scanning the QR
on illegal immigrants in 1 year. Now, they did this by funneling tens of
deputy. In fact, we're the only party I know of our kind which has a thriving veterans association within our membership. And one of our deputy leaders, Andy Hudd, a railway workers leader, is in fact himself a 20-year veteran of the Royal Navy. So nothing that I'm going to say this evening is in any way to disrespect our armed forces or to deny that sometimes wars have to be fought. We stand for a proper and properly funded defense for Great Britain. If anyone were to seek to harm our country and its legitimate interests, I stress legitimate interests, we would be in the first ranks of those volunteering to serve to defend our country. Both of my great grandfathers and both of my grandfathers were fighters in the British Armed Forces. One of them, an Irishman, who, notwithstanding being both a communist and an Irish Republican, volunteered to join the British Army and fought his way across North Africa and up the length of Italy under Montgomery in the 8th Army. I hope I've made clear that when I say that we regard with horror and absolute defiant opposition the statement made by the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer yesterday after his meeting with the EU leaders in Paris, that Britain was going to commit forces on the ground, young men and even women, to die perchance to defend the Zelensky regime in Ukraine. We completely oppose this on multiple levels. First of all, I'm not sure what Keir Starmer was doing in Paris. Most of us were under the impression that we had left the EU. It's abundantly clear over the last 7 months that Keir Starmer seeks to bring us closer and closer alongside, if not inside, the European Union again. A failing European Union that is now a hallmark for corruption and incompetence, and in the last few days, a hallmark of the warmongering belligerence. Now, I'm glad to say, now absent from Washington, but instead being echoed from Brussels. The second reason why we oppose what Keir Starmer said after that meeting, we don't know, of course, what he said at that meeting, was the carefully placed articles in the conservative press, the Daily Telegraph in particular, that 10,000 British soldiers will be sent to Ukraine after the war has ended. This last statement is intended to inoculate the stance of the British government against too great a backlash from the British people, and I intend tonight to pick that statement apart. We have an armed forces so shrunken that it could fit comfortably into Wembley Stadium. We have 76,000 members of the British Army, only half of whom could be vaguely described as fighting forces, and 25% of them at any one time are not available for duty for one reason or another. This means that Keir Starmer is proposing to commit a quarter or even a third of the entire strength of the British Army to put its boots on the ground, take its weapons with them in defense of Zelensky in Ukraine, leaving our country essentially defenseless. We can't guard our own borders, but we're going to send a quarter or a third of the British armed forces to defend Zelensky's borders, such as they are, and I will come to that, I promise you. We believe that the British Army, underpaid, underhoused, under-armored, ill-equipped, and undertrained, is simply not capable of being sent on an expeditionary force to a war against a hypersonically nuclear-armed superpower, and one which, moreover, now seems to be getting alongside the biggest superpower, the Donald Trump United States of America. Keir Starmer effectively declared war on Russia a long time ago, but in the last few days, he's effectively declaring war on Donald Trump and the United States of America at the same time. I've heard of the folly of fighting wars on two fronts, but that, my dear friends, is patently ridiculous. But it's not just because we are not capable of forming any meaningful expeditionary force in Ukraine that we oppose this statement, this stance of the British government. We believe that it flows from an irrational, deep, and centuries-old hatred amongst the British establishment for the people of Russia. And lest you think I'm speaking up for Bolshevik Russia or Putin's Russia, I'm not. Our ancient hatred with Russia goes back to the early part of the 19th century, before Bolshevism, before Putin were ever dreamt of. It was an imperial rivalry to begin with, but as neither Russia nor Britain has an empire any longer, it can be described as irrational, an irrational hatred. From the beginning of the Ukraine war, it has been clear that the British government, more than any government in the world, more even than Joe Biden, more even than little soldier Schurz and Anna Baerbock in Germany, the British government, British governments under successive British prime ministers who have been driving the refusal to recognize the root causes of this war and refusing any idea of a negotiated settlement to it. And that's not something that we in the Workers' Party can accept. We demand rational government from those supposedly in charge of our national affairs. We demand from our government a proper calibration of British interests and above all of the British working classes' interests. That has not been happening. The British have been right at the forefront. Boris Johnson actually went to Kiev to wreck the peace agreement, which had been initialed by Zelensky himself in Istanbul at the very beginning of this war, which could have brought it to a close 1 million lives ago. It was Boris Johnson who went to Kiev to bludgeon and perhaps to bribe Volodymyr Zelensky to continue the war on promises which have turned out to be hollow, if not false. We now hear from the NATO leaders that Ukraine would never have been allowed to join the NATO military alliance. We now hear from the same people that neither will it be allowed to join the European Union, or at least it's somewhere at the back of Armenia in the queue to do so. These statements can only have been hollow or indeed false, but they persuaded Zelensky to tear up the peace agreement. By the way, the British government was also complicit in the clear, now openly admitted, breach of the Minsk II agreements, which could have stopped this war before it even started. We were not a guarantor of Minsk II. The Germans and the French and then the Security Council were the guarantors of the Minsk II agreement. But we did everything we could to use the time bought by the Minsk II agreement to arm, to train, and to interpolate British special forces and other security services who must remain nameless, to prepare for an inevitable showdown which the British were determined to do. Little Ben Wallace, when he was our defense minister, openly talked to me about the need for revenge for his ancestors in the Royal Scots Guards, who were amongst the gallant, who rode into the valley of death in the charge of the Light Brigade. These revanchist, foolish, ancient hatreds are what has driven Britain's role in this conflict. It was the British who pushed for Storm Shadow missiles to be allowed to be fired deep inside Russian territory. There are good reasons for believing that it was the British state which planned and helped execute the ill-fated, doomed, latter-day charge of the Light Brigade, of the young Ukrainian men in their incursion into Kursk, of all places. Anyone who knows the history of the Second World War will know of the importance of Kursk. It was the British what done it. It was the British that pushed Zelensky into a madcap adventure which has cost the lives of tens, maybe scores of thousands of young Ukrainian conscripts, now as young as 16, now as old as 60. So the British have played a particularly despicable role in the conflict in Ukraine. We've actually invaded Russia 3 times. I'm not sure if everybody knows that. We sent more than 100,000 soldiers to invade Russia twice during the civil war after the Russian Revolution. 108,000 at Murmansk invading Russia. We have too much baggage with Russia for the idea that we can be peacekeepers between the Ukrainian and Russian lines to be a particularly bonkers idea. And Sergei Lavrov, the world heavyweight champion of diplomacy, made it very clear today that no NATO forces, however flagged, whether flagged as EU forces or flagged under their own national flag, will be acceptable in Ukraine when the war ends. That's the end for Keir Starmer's plan, or it ought to be. But knowing Keir Starmer, we cannot be sure that it will be. It's the end because it means that anybody coming as a peacekeeper when Russia has declared their presence unacceptable means that those forces will be subject to military attack. Our 10,000 men will be the equivalent of the 600 that rode into the valley of death in the Crimean War. And that is simply unacceptable across the political spectrum, not the bogus political spectrum, the 2 cheeks of the same ass and what lies between them, namely the Liberal Democrats. Not them. They're all gung-ho for our young men, our sons, our grandsons, to be sent into the maw of what could become, as I say, a latter-day Battle of Balaclava, charge of the Light Brigade. We, on the left, as a socialist party, and others who are not remotely supporters of me, of us, or of our ideas, have united on social media, for that is the only place that our position will be heard. Certainly not in Parliament, not if this Speaker of the House of Commons has anything to do with it, not if the current configuration in Parliament has anything to do with it. But on social media, there is an enormous upsurge of opposition to this idea. There's an enormous opposition to it for all the reasons I have adumbrated and more. But I want to dive deeper into why our political class would even consider, never mind actually decide upon, such a course of military folly. Well, the first reason is they don't give a toss about these soldiers. They don't give a toss about Tommy Atkins. They pretend to as they cheer them off to war, but when Tommy Atkins is lying down in Piccadilly Gardens in Manchester, hooked on smack, hooked on any of the new drugs that they pick up in Strangeways prison, they are not present. I've picked up Tommy Atkins in Prince's Gardens. I've done it many times, in fact. I know that the British Armed Forces are abandoned by our government once they've come back from the pointless, needless wars that successive British governments for the last quarter of a century nearly have been sending them into. I know that that's one of the reasons why these men who've never heard a shot fired in anger in their lives are now dressing up in camouflage. Keir Starmer in camouflage? Well, he's a cross-dresser, that's for sure, but he doesn't cut a dash for me as any kind of military leader. Kemi Badenoch, please. Ed Davey, do you think any of them are going into war? You think any of their sons are going into war? No, it's your son, your grandson, your brother, your husband that they intend to send if they were to go ahead with this cockamamie plan. But the second reason is that Britain has lost its empire and has still not found a way, still not found a role for itself. Those of us who supported Brexit, like me, were of the view that Brexit gave us the opportunity to be, for the first time in 100 years and more, a truly independent country, an automatic friend of none, an automatic enemy of none, a country that will look out for the interests of its own people and will seek to trade rather than wage war across the globe. The British ruling elite has not yet found a role. It still dreams as if this was 1825 instead of 2025. And until we shake ourselves from this imperial delusion, we will be at risk of being led by one unpopular prime minister or another into another war to try and rescue their ratings, which is my third point. That Keir Starmer is doing this because he is the most hated prime minister of all time. And I was born when Winston Churchill was the prime minister of Britain. I've lived through many hated prime ministers, including Tony Blair, including Margaret Thatcher, but there has never been a more hated prime minister than Keir Starmer. So much so, he's had to cancel local government elections in May because he knows that his party, his government, will be put to the sword in any elections held in Britain in the foreseeable future. Democracy must prevail, said Starmer in his speech last night, read from a bunch of notes. What kind of prime minister has to read a statement of that importance from a sheaf of papers? What kind of war leader is that? Keir Starmer knows or hopes that by dressing up in military uniform and sending our young men off to die in a war, they will effectively be a tripwire. But they won't be any tripwire in actual fact, because any British soldiers going to Ukraine will have no Article 5 protection. They will not be there as part of NATO. No member of NATO will have any obligation or inclination to respond to any Russian destruction. With one missile, the Oroshenk missile, we could see all of our soldiers destroyed in one strike, and nobody will lift a finger to help us. And that brings me to Donald Trump. Haven't we really come to something? That it's the Americans that are seeking peace and the Europeans that are demanding more war? What kind of cross-dressing is this? So-called liberals, so-called social democrats, even so-called socialists in Europe, in Britain, are demanding war, while Donald Trump, the man they said would take us into World War III, is the only man who is trying to stop it. And the meeting in Riyadh today between Sergei Lavrov and Marco Rubio, the American Secretary of State, is the future. The sanctions will have to end, said Rubio. All the hotlines are reconnected. All the complex of American-Russian relations have been reestablished. Trump and Putin are about to meet. The war is about to end at last. And amity between Russia and America is about to break out. So what's the British attitude? No, let's stop it. Let's try and blow it up, or rather disable it by blowing up 10,000 British soldiers, your sons and mine. It's come to something, hasn't it? Where it's the American Republican Party that are demanding an end to war, and the so-called leftists and liberals that are demanding more and more of it. Well, we in the Workers' Party, we are not large. We are bigger than any party of our kind has ever been before in the history of Britain in the democratic era. But we are not large, but we have many friends and we have many allies. And so my last word is this. If, as I said, the Queen doesn't have enough soldiers, or the King doesn't have enough soldiers, the only way that Keir Starmer could possibly implement the kind of ludicrous war plans that he has in mind would be to reintroduce conscription in this country. And so I'm here to say to you, but more importantly, I'm here to say to him, if Keir Starmer even dreams of trying to conscript our young working class men and women into the service of his ignoble wars, we will lead and organize a mass movement, no to conscription, a mass movement the likes of which has never been seen since the campaign against the poll tax in the 1980s, which eventually destroyed the government of Margaret Thatcher and consigned the poll tax to the dustbin of history. Don't do it, Prime Minister. And if you insist on doing so, then the first flag-draped coffins of young British service personnel returning from the carnage will destroy your government and your reputation forever. Follow us on social media, the Workers' Party of Britain. Follow No to NATO.
He's dead set on
Well, Donald Trump just moved forward with one of the most aggressive trade wars in the history of the United States. Canada, Mexico, and even the entire European Union is under threat as Trump seems dead set on imposing new tariffs on everyone around the globe. But the potential fallout from Trump's actions could actually be catastrophic for America. Just look at this map, highlighting the top trading partner for each U.S. state. Incredibly, 42 of the 50 states count either Canada, Mexico, or China as their top trading partner. The truth is Donald Trump now has a massive problem on his hands if he continues down this road. Just think about it. Trump campaigned on reducing inflation, lowering prices, and stimulating the economy. But tariffs are taxes. It doesn't take a genius to know that adding tariffs will only increase costs for the average American consumer. It's just basic economics. But there is a much bigger story going on behind these tariffs. Canada and Mexico are not in a position of strength to fight back. Their economies are just too small to have any leverage against Trump. But there is one economic powerhouse that does have the leverage to not only withstand Trump's new tariffs, but also fight back and systematically target some of America's most important industries. The Financial Post broke this story, detailing how China has strategically targeted the tungsten industry and stopped all exports to the United States in retaliation to Trump's new tariffs. China accounts for about 80% of the world's tungsten output, and tungsten hasn't been mined commercially in the US since 2015. The United States has counted China as its biggest source of tungsten imports, and ironically, tungsten is one of the key minerals needed for the United States weapons manufacturing. And this is exactly the type of leverage China has in this new trade war. Just listen to this quote from Louis Black, the CEO of one of America's leading mineral production companies. It's the warning shot because we cannot exist without it. Our economy, manufacturing, defense, everything, it is so dependent on it. And yet Russia, China, and North Korea have about 90% of the output. Wow, what a statement. Three of the United States' biggest geopolitical rivals control 90% of the market share of tungsten, the key mineral needed to build American weapons. But if Donald Trump wants a trade war with China, these are the exact type of industries the Chinese government is going to target with retaliatory sanctions. Everyone, this is why we study geopolitics, because as Donald Trump has proven in his first few weeks in office, quick decisions from the White House can instantly affect the values of publicly traded companies. Stay tuned at the end of today's presentation as I'm going to show you an exciting company working directly in the tungsten industry that could benefit tremendously from this upcoming trade war. But first, we need to break down some of the most common misunderstandings regarding tariffs. To show you how lost some Americans are, just look at this tweet from crypto insider Anthony Pompliano, who states, tariffs don't cause inflation. Tariffs lead to lower prices for American consumers. Tariffs create American jobs, and tariffs lead to lower income taxes. Earlier this week, I had the pleasure of interviewing Stephen Roach, the former chairman for Morgan Stanley Asia and senior fellow at the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale University. I asked him directly to make sense of this tweet and if passing tariffs make any logical sense. Take us from the mind of an economist. Can you break down these comments and just kind of give us a little bit more common sense into what tariffs really do?
Well, are you sure that came from a financial guy or did it come from the White House? I mean, that sounds pretty much like it's parroting the convoluted views of our president on tariffs, who absolutely does not understand what a tariff is. From his point of view, tariffs are a tax on foreign countries, and he wants to capture that tax and bring it back home and use it to fund his MAGA agenda. What that fails to appreciate is that tariffs are paid at the port embarkation by American companies who do the importing. It's a cost increase on us. And the idea that that lowers prices, creates jobs, and opens up great new opportunities is something that, you know, a politician might argue, but there's no credible economist that I know of that believes that.
But Professor Roach reveals an interesting insight. If the president of the United States doesn't even understand how tariffs work, then this actually gives Beijing a unique position of strength in the upcoming trade war. To understand what I mean, look at this new Foreign Affairs article entitled China's Trump Strategy. Beijing is preparing to take advantage of disruption. It doesn't matter if you like Donald Trump or not. One thing everyone can certainly agree on is that Donald Trump has indeed brought a lot of disruption to the US government in his first few weeks as president. But here is how Beijing is analyzing the situation. Trump may well be able to score some short-term victory victories, but Beijing plans look beyond him. They think Trump's policies will undermine U.S. power and reduce U.S. global standing in the long run. And when that happens, China wants to be ready to take advantage. Over the past few years, we've seen China's government improve relations with some of its most important neighbors in the Asia-Pacific region. One of the biggest examples of this is the impressive breakthrough in the China-India relationship. Both countries were engaged in a border dispute that resulted in a military standoff for over 4 years. However, Xi and Modi resolved that conflict last October during the 2024 BRICS summit in Russia, shocking the world and bringing the two nations and the entire BRICS alliance closer in solidarity. China's government has even allowed Indian nationals the rite of passage to resume pilgrimages to Tibet. I bet you never heard that story in Western media, but it's geopolitical wins like this giving China more political leverage. China has also made progress with Japan, the United States' most important ally in Asia, by resuming political visits between Chinese and Japanese leaders for the first time in 7 years. China has also restored visa-free entry for Japanese visitors. I think the most important insight from that Foreign Affairs article was the quote that while Trump may be able to score some short-term victories, Beijing plans look beyond him. This is an absolutely crucial point to understand. Everything in China is approached and done with strategic long-term planning. During the same week that Donald Trump threatened to pass 25% tariffs against Canada and Mexico, which, by the way, would have been an absolute disaster for the U.S. economy, China was welcoming the Prime Minister of Thailand and celebrating the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations by signing 14 new cooperation agreements. Diversifying China's trade away from the United States has been a primary goal for Beijing over the past 4 years, and the Chinese have been wildly successful in preparing for Trump's new trade war by solidifying these new trade relationships. Chinese investment into Vietnam, for example, increased by 80% in 2023 to $4.5 billion, with the Chinese-Vietnamese bilateral trade reaching over $260 billion. This amount is greater than the China-Russia relationship, despite Beijing buying large amounts of cheap Russian gas as a result of the war in Ukraine. Unlike in 2016, China's leadership now knows what to expect from Trump this time around. Chinese leaders remain confident that even if the country's economy suffers, 4 years of Trump is unlikely to send it to a full-blown crisis. If Trump follows through on his declared policies, such as those on trade and territorial expansion, he could do severe damage to the United States' credibility and global leadership. And once again, we have a prime example of China resorting to strategic long-term planning, playing the long game, and essentially waiting for Trump's own policies to dismantle the foundations of U.S. global hegemony. The future of the United States is very much uncertain with Trump as president. One day he could wake up and decide to pass 25% tariffs against our closest ally and neighbor Canada, but then reverse that decision within 24 hours. Trump likely backed down because of the immense pressure from his wealthy inner circle after the stock market crashed in response to the tariff announcement. And this is the balancing act Trump is now facing. His billionaire allies want market stability, while his political insides are pushing for a full-scale trade war. But so many members of Trump's inner circle have commercial interests tied back to China. Elon Musk is the world's richest man, but 55% of every Tesla is built in the Shanghai Gigafactory. Even Kash Patel, Donald Trump's pick to lead the FBI, owns over $1 million of shares in the Chinese fashion company Shein. And as this AP article points out, he has a roster of foreign clients with interests that could clash with the FBI he hopes to lead. What's most interesting here is that Donald Trump started this trade war with the goal of reducing America's trade deficit. But as he sets out to tariff and sanction countries, this could end up backfiring and hurting the one thing Donald Trump cares most about, the status of the US dollar as a world reserve currency. For a better look into what's really going on, listen to the insights from London School of Economics professor Ke Jin, one of the best insiders into the Chinese economy.
China has signed 40 countries bilateral swap agreements to settle in the local currencies. Of course, these are marginal improvements, but you see the dollar slowly declining. And the fundamental question, even apart from financial sanctions, is that there's a dollar shortage. Emerging markets, the size of GDP, is growing massively. The demand for dollars is there. There's not enough liquidity. So now the interest rate is high, the dollar is at a very high level. This actually has a huge financial implication on the developing countries who are all looking to diversify.
Did you catch that? There's a dollar shortage. Emerging markets are exploding in growth. Demand for the dollar is high, but the liquidity isn't there. This means countries are actively looking for dollars to facilitate global trade, and they can't get any. And Ke Jin just outlined exactly why Trump's tariffs aren't just catastrophic for the global economy. They're actively accelerating the collapse of the the US dollar. Trump wants to reduce the US trade deficit, but he also wants to maintain the dollar as the global reserve currency. These two goals cannot coexist. They contradict one another. If the US wants the world to keep using the dollar in global trade and finance, then it has to keep running a trade deficit, meaning the US has to continue buying more products than it exports so that dollars can keep circulating throughout the global economy. That is the only way to sustain dollar hegemony. But if Trump implements tariffs, then the other countries can't sell goods to the US, which means they can't access dollars. That's exactly what's happening right now. These rapidly growing economies, countries that need dollars for trade and finance, are being cut off from the supply. And what happens when nations desperately need dollars but can't get them? They simply stop using them. And that's why we're seeing more and more countries ditch the dollar in favor of bilateral trade in their own currencies and alternate payment systems. Trump's tariffs are like pouring gasoline on the fire. He's actively blocking nations from requiring dollars while at the same time giving them every incentive to move away from the dollar entirely. Make no mistake, this is going to send shockwaves through the global financial system. Some countries are going to be severely impacted in the short term, but China is perfectly positioned to weather the storm. China's export-driven economy and the growing strength of the renminbi put it in prime position to capture the benefits of the failing dollar. The longer the US holds on to this unsustainable system, the more China benefits. The United States thought it could strong-arm China and the rest of the world into submission through tariffs and trade wars. But all it's done is accelerate the rise of an alternate system, one where the US is no longer at the center of global trade. China, meanwhile, has played the long game, strengthening its economic ties with the fastest growing markets, building resilient trade networks, and positioning itself as the key player in a multipolar world. While Trump scrambles to tax allies, cut off trade, and push the dollar-dependent system to its breaking point, China is simply watching as the world reorients itself in its favor. Make no mistake, this is one of the biggest economic realignments in modern history, and it's only just beginning. But as promised, I want to shift to the investing portion of today's video and show you an exact industry that could
other questions about world events. Which produced the bigger reaction in Moscow? Donald Trump's suggestion that
Appreciate the love, family. Salute.
the U.S. would buy and own Gaza, or Donald Trump's revelation that he had spent 90 minutes on the phone with President Putin, and that this would lead to a face-to-face meeting between Secretary of State Rubio and Foreign Minister Lavrov, which, as we know, occurred today. Long question.
And okay, I could give a short answer, Judge. Ukraine, Putin, and Trump, because this is their war, as they define it here. Of course, they are immensely focused as well on Palestine, Russian diplomacy especially. But today, the whole of Russia, especially Moscow, everybody was riveted following Riyadh and then the post-Riyadh declarations by both delegations and the Lavrov wrap-up, which was extraordinary. But that's Lavrov, right?
Okay,
And,
what? Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, just one thing. He was visibly pleased, Judge, with the fact that finally there is a direct channel of communication, diplomatic at the highest level. It's what he has been telling many of us for over a year here.
Basically, aside from his joy, what did he reveal? I mean, we understand that they really went back to basics. And that
Yes.
what they agreed on today was the size of their respective staffs and their respective embassies. I mean, I didn't even know that that was an issue. We're talking about stopping a war, and these guys are talking about, how many CIA agents are going to pretend to be diplomats and show up at the American embassy in Moscow, and vice versa at the Russian embassy in Washington.
Absolutely correct, because this is today was about establishing trust, and establishing trust means no hidden regime change or Coral Revolution style gimmicks in the background with these agents, of course. So what Rubio said was also extremely interesting. He recognized that this was a groundbreaking moment. There were a lot of jokes here that Rubio did not dissolve in front of Lavrov, because Lavrov is, wow, Lavrov is the Himalayas of diplomacy, right?
Right.
But
Rubio did not understand some of Lavrov's jokes.
No, that was very interesting, because Lavrov did not joke. Since he arrived in Riyadh, he was very, very serious, and so was Ushakov. They made a slight joke to the fact that the American delegation was very surprised when they learned that American businesses lost over $300 billion by exiting the Russian market. Obviously, they didn't have this information.
Wow.
And this is Trump territory, Judge. Follow the money.
Right. I know that they're not far from where I live, in Port Newark. There's I don't know how this could be, $100 million worth of Russian vodka sitting in a warehouse that can't be sold. So somebody lost money. The American importer lost money. The Russian exporter lost money. The Russian manufacturer lost money. But were the Americans? In other words, Marco Rubio is the Secretary of State. I know he's new at the job, and at this point in his career, he can't hold a candle to Foreign Minister Lavrov, who is the dean of foreign ministers in the world. However, was he ignorant of the fact that American businesses suffer? Does he believe the nonsense that the American press and American intelligence community, and to a certain extent his boss, the president, have mouthed that Russian economy has suffered under the sanctions, whereas in reality, the Russian economy is better today than it was 4 years ago?
Well, it's crazy, because the CIA, until what, a day or two, they were feeding all sorts of stupidities to Trump team 2.0 about the Russian economy. And at least today at the table, of course, we don't have the details at the table. They got a pretty good picture. And Lavrov said that explicitly. Now they have a much better understanding of our position, which in Lavrov speak means now they understand not only our geopolitical imperatives, but also our geoeconomic imperatives. And this figure of concerning American businesses losing money because they basically abandoned the Russian market was given by Kirill Dmitriev, who's the head of the Russian Investment Fund. And he's always in very good contact with American businessmen who are now begging him, literally, to go back to the Russian market.
Well, this was a very smart move, because I doubt that Donald Trump knows this number. And as soon as they report to him, he's going to go, what? $300 billion?
Exactly.
Wow.
So it was indeed a breakthrough moment in terms of okay, let's start from scratch. We are adults on the same table and go, these are you want to understand a little bit of Russian. These are the basics to understand Russian. And nobody better than Lavrov to explain them. And from I would say a security point of view, Ushakov, direct advisor to Putin.
Did they speak entirely in English, since Minister Lavrov is fluent in English?
Lavrov is totally fluent in English. Ushakov, more or less. Dmitriev as well. We don't know, Judge, if there was instant translation. Probably for certain stretches, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So President Putin and the Russian delegation are ecstatic at the first meeting. Secretary Rubio and the American delegation are happy at the first meeting. Did they agree to meet again, or have they meeting tomorrow, or have they gone home?
No. They are now establishing, let's say, parallel channels of communication, including the one that everybody was paying attention to, which is going to be Ukraine. Ushakov said that Putin himself is going to designate his top negotiator on Ukraine, and the Americans are going to do the same thing. It's probably going to be a team on both sides.
Did Marco Rubio say, hey, Sergey, here's my cell. Call me whenever you want. I'm not Tony Blinken. Did we have something like that?
No, Judge, because he was visibly intimidated. All the footage and all the photos that we saw, he looked intimidated.
Yeah.
But at least
I was worried about that, but I didn't want to raise it. And as long as you have raised it, is that a serious issue? I mean, almost any foreign diplomat would be intimidated in the presence of Sergei Lavrov.
The Africans usually are not. You know why? Because he immediately starts cracking jokes with the Africans. The Latin Americans, the same thing. In Southeast Asia, people, they're very affable with them. Indonesians, Thais, Malaysians, etc. But of course, after 3 years without talking face to face with the Americans, this is a new ball game completely. In fact, in the column that I wrote, I tried to frame it as the real beginning of a new great game, because now we have both superpowers talking face to face, and hopefully with mutual respect, which is something that I've emphasized over and over again.
What went on in Valdai, Moscow, that you observed and participated in last week?
You
wrote a column about. This involved the PLO, it's involved BRICS, it involved Syria, it involved Turkey. What happened there?
This was the annual Valdai Middle East Conference, Judge, which it's a complicated affair because some of the scholars and the experts that they call are, I would say, irrelevant to the conversation, or they don't bring anything extra. And some technically are excellent. For instance, there was a guy from Azerbaijan talking about corridors of connectivity. He was brilliant, he coined the expression corridor mania, talking about Azerbaijan is involved in at least 13 different connectivity corridors with everybody, with Russia, China, with the Americans as well. So this was pretty good. The presence of Palestine was not what we were expecting. They called somebody from the PLO, repeating basically PLO. Everybody knows already what the PLO thinks, and the PLO is not independent, as we all know it. There was nobody from Hamas or the opposition, or somebody representing Gaza, for instance. But and very important, the Syrian ambassador to Moscow, he was supposed to be on a panel, and the last minute he said no. So everybody was expecting to hear from him. What is the new Syria? Can you explain to us? Unfortunately, he was not there.
Wow. Tell us about your trip to Donbass.
Well,
first, your general impressions, and then I'm going to ask you some specific questions.
Of course.
Where were you, and how long were you there, and what is the impression that you came away with?
It was a very powerful, emotional experience. It was in the space of 1 year, since February last year. This was my third trip to Donbass, but this was 11 months after the last one, where I managed to go to Avdiivka, which at the time had been liberated only a few days before. And it was a very complicated trip because Avdiivka was still being shelled and there were drones all over. Our FPV drone locators, they were blinking red all the time. And now was incredible. Of course, when you enter Avdiivka, it's like the set of an apocalypse movie. And you are right in the middle of it. It's total destruction everywhere. But now you see glimpses here and there of, for instance, they explained to me that each apartment block, they are all of them destroyed. The ones who are being rebuilt, they are rebuilt by a specific company from a specific Russian region with a timetable. It's public. And I managed to enter two of them who are already rebuilt in a space of less than 1 year. Very impressive. There are some shops.
This is an area that under Russian law is Russia. Under international law is Russia. The Ukrainians claim it's Ukraine, and the Ukrainians are bombing and killing what they say are their own people. Do I have this correct?
This area, this Avdiivka, Judge, I think the best definition of Avdiivka is a company town founded in where a big coke chemical plant was founded during the Soviet Union in 1963, and they had more than 40,000 people working at this town. It was part of Ukraine during the USSR, of course. In this past 3 years, after the start of the special military operations, Avdiivka became a fortress, shelling Donetsk and the outskirts of Donetsk non-stop. So it had to be liberated by the Donetsk army with the help from Russian army, helped by the Chechens as well.
Okay, got it.
And this happened 1 year ago.
Got it.
And I was there 2 days before 1 year of the liberation. So it was a very, very emotional moment. And a contraposition to the Munich Security Conference. Instead of going to Munich to see the war, you go to Avdiivka.
Avdiivka, you'll really see the war. Did you
Yes.
observe or did you learn of people taking shelter in two monasteries, one for priests and one for nuns?
Yes.
Which, notwithstanding the religious sanctuary internationally attributed to houses of worship, like the Israelis in Gaza destroying mosques, the Ukrainians were attempting to destroy these monasteries in order to kill the people inside. Do I have this right?
Absolutely correct, Judge. This was Sunday morning. We were in Avdiivka on Saturday, and imagine in the morning you are in the middle of a total destruction zone. In the afternoon, I was face to face with the Donetsk Philharmonic, with an opera singer out of this world, singing popular tunes of the 1960s. So this gives us the spirit of Donetsk. It's a working man's town, but it's a cultural mecca as well. This Philharmonic is considered one of the best in Russia, and they are absolutely outstanding. Well, on Sunday morning, we went to Ugledar. Ugledar, just to give you an idea, it was liberated 4 months ago only. So basically, the Ukrainians were on top of a hill on the other side of the main highway, and they were shelling everything in Ugledar, in the outskirts of Ugledar, and including this particular monastery compound. It's two monasteries, a male and female, a church, and some convents around. And they showed me, which is something absolutely incredible. A female convent was bombed by 5 HIMARS in sequence, and a lot of nuns were killed. When you learn something,
what would be the purpose of selecting this internationally protected and obviously non-military target, a convent with nuns in it. What would the Ukrainians gain by killing these nuns?
Nothing. It's terrorism. It's basically terrorize the population. Like, when I was still in Avdiivka, I was talking to two ladies in their early to mid 60s. And one of them had been a hostage in the basement of her apartment block for months, along with 10 or 12 other people. They were barely surviving. They had no water, no electricity, they had a small generator, and they were being kept there as kinds of hostages by the Ukrainian army when they were still occupying several of these apartment buildings. So it's the banality of evil expressed as terrorizing civilians, which the regime in Kiev is a master. This is what they do essentially. It is a terrorist regime, and including terrorizing their own citizens in Ukraine. Can you imagine what they consider rebel, like those traitors, Russian-speaking traitors in the eastern Ukraine, Novorossiya? So the bombing, the shelling of this monastery, which the church is absolutely extraordinary. And when you enter the church, not only it's beautiful inside, but there's still people living inside the church, around 50 or so. A few months ago, there were 250, almost 300, because it was the only safe place in the surroundings, even bombarded, because the church is more or less subterranean, unlike the monasteries, you see. So even if they were shelling, they were protected by living inside the church. And I still saw basically elderly people who are too afraid to go anywhere. They are living literally inside the church. You see their beds, there's a communal kitchen, and right in front of them, there's a priest, celebrating mass.
What language is spoken there? Is it Ukrainian or Russian?
Russian. They all speak Russian. They're all Russian speakers. Yes.
Russian speakers, Russian culturally, Russian historically.
Culturally Russian, exact. Orthodox Christians, Russia. Absolutely.
What is your observation about the movement of the front lines westward?
I talked to commanders, and one of these commanders, we became very good friends since my previous visits. And he said that they are advancing steadily west in the direction of Pokrovsk. Once they get Pokrovsk, everything in front of them is open. There will be no resistance, and they can go anywhere they want, literally. Some of the commanders say that the order for a massive strike or avalanche is not coming. It should have come already. So there are different points of view about it. And other ones say, no, well, this is what we usually do. And we are advancing steadily. And they are falling in front of us. We organize cauldrons and mini cauldrons. They fall into it. And now they're running out of weapons, running out of men, running out of motivation. So, for instance, when we tried to discuss Munich Security Conference, and this was a few days before today's meeting in Riyadh, they were deeply skeptical. Most of them don't think that anything will come out of it. And they say, look, we, the front line, we are going to solve this thing.
Were you able to glean from your communications with Russians in the Donbass their attitude about America, the American government, and the American people?
No, this time, no, Judge, because I was specifically focused on in Luhansk, in Donetsk, seeing the first signs of normalization in both big cities of Donetsk Republic and Lugansk Republic. Lugansk now is a booming town, and Donetsk is the same. But you still hear the odd, loud boom in the middle of the night. It's still there, but it's not being shelled like 1 year ago when it was almost where it was.
Do they know that the booms are caused by American weapons and American ammunition?
Of course, they know everything. Technically, Judge, they know everything, especially in Donetsk. Donetsk is also a communication center. It's a connectivity corridor for the whole of Donbass. So they know Where are the HIMARS? How do they get there? The Wunderwaffen coming from Europe. They know everything. Now, at least, you feel for the first time a feeling in Donetsk that it's slowly stabilizing, because now the front line is very far away. According to the calculations of one of the commanders, the front line now is around 50 kilometers away from Donetsk. To give an idea, when I was there a year ago, it was 4 kilometers outside of Donetsk. Well, there's a sizable difference, and you feel it in the city. The city is way more relaxed. It's being
do you have any feeling for when the Ukrainians will give up the ghost, either because they don't have any more soldiers, or they don't have any more equipment, or they don't have any more urge to fight?
It basically we'll see when the Russians arrive in Pokrovsk and take over Pokrovsk. And there's another information that one of the commanders told me is relative. It is secret, in fact. Other parts of the front who may collapse even faster, but he asked me not to talk about it. So they expect big changes, let's say in the next 2 to 3 months, all along the front lines. And this will be in parallel to the negotiations between Team Trump and Team Putin.
Yes. Fascinating conversation. What a fascinating life you live. You're back in Moscow now, right?
Well, I am an old school foreign correspondent, Judge. This is what we do. We go places.
Well, travel safely and well, my dear.
On around the world, there are currently multiple states dealing with horrific floods. States like Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, I believe Arkansas, and especially Kentucky, which I believe is being hit the hardest. And on top of that, some of these states, like Kentucky, are currently dealing with snow on top of the flooding. At the time of this recording, 14 people did unfortunately lose their lives, and countless more are injured. Take a look at this video footage this person in Kentucky had captured. When something like this happens and it's very chaotic, targeting multiple locations and so forth, a lot of us generally ask the question, is this natural or could this be something more? These next couple of videos are by Homestead Horsemanship on TikTok. Now, if you go look at his channel is all about horses and raising horses, but these next couple of videos are different. He goes on to talk about what he witnessed in the skies of Kentucky. And remember, Kentucky is one of the locations that is currently being hit the hardest by the floods.
Yesterday when I came home, I noticed a plane that was circling. And about every hour, it would circle over top of my house. And the first time I could actually see it. And after that, I couldn't see it any longer, but I could hear it. So the second time it came through, I decided to go look on the flight tracker online. And what I noticed was it was going around and around in circles around this county where I live at. And it did that for about 3 hours yesterday. the bottom end of the county all the way up to the top end, back around, covering the whole county here where I am in a big circle. And I took a screenshot of that and sent that to Casey Littlehouse so she can verify that that's what I was actually seeing on the flight track. I posted it here, but it shows that my exact location where I live at right here, so I'm not going to do that. But I sent it to her so she can verify what I'm saying. It made, I don't know how many circles that it made, but it looked like about 15 or 20 circles around the county. And last night we got pour down rain started, and it's been raining ever since. And now they're saying that they're predicting or forecasting Category 3 flooding here where I am, and it's been pouring and pouring and pouring. The rain is pouring the rain right now. You can probably hear on top of the roof here, and it's done this for hours now. But it's supposed to do this all night into tomorrow. And like I said, right now they're saying Category 3 flooding here in my area. So, are those two things connected? Did that plane have anything to do with what we're seeing now? Just a few hours later, it started actually. Probably about 8 hours later, the rain started after the plane stopped and left. Circle, circle, circle. Why else would it be circling a county like that for 3 hours? And then a few hours later, here we have this. I don't know if it's connected or not. I know that they can control the weather. They can make it rain. They can make it storm. They can make hurricanes. They can make earthquakes. I mean, look it up. It's right there. I mean, it's easy to find the patents for all these machines and stuff to do this. And you can look back at Vietnam. They extended the monsoon season for a month where it just rained and rained and rained and flooded Vietnam. Most of the Vietcong couldn't travel. That's declassified. So you can imagine how advanced that they are now. But you can hear right now pouring the rain. I went out about 2 hours ago to see what the roads look like, and my truck sets up pretty tall.
So this individual witnessed a plane going in circles in Kentucky on a flight tracker right before these horrific floods. Now, something also similar to this was seen in North Carolina. A plane was going in a very specific flight pattern, a very strange flight pattern, right before, I think it was either before the hurricane or during the hurricane as it intensified and hit the mountains. The hurricane I'm talking about is, of course, Hurricane Helene. Something similar to this was also seen in Dubai just right before that historic rainstorm. There were planes also seen circling the area. So is it hard to believe that what is currently happening in Kentucky and these other states in regards to these floods is something not natural? No, especially given the fact that we have multiple examples in the past of planes circling an area, and then right after, there is very horrific weather. But when it comes to North Carolina and Hurricane Helene, there were a lot of quote unquote theories. Again, not really theories, but there was a lot of information coming out about North Carolina and lithium. And Hurricane Helene was targeting certain spots in North Carolina that had a lot of lithium. Now, Asheville, North Carolina being one of them, which was a place in North Carolina that was hit the hardest by Hurricane Helene. And I've made plenty of videos on this. But what's interesting, this individual on TikTok, Beauty Merc, he also uncovered something about Kentucky and why it may be targeted.
The state of Kentucky has experienced a series of devastating floods this past week, but there's something that has piqued my interest considering the location of where these floods have taken place. Which, before I go any further, let me just say that my condolences go out to every single family member that has been affected by these floods, okay? And that this video is for educational purposes. For example, these two areas right here are obviously experiencing a lot of heavy flooding right now. And obviously, these are not the only locations in Kentucky that are experiencing heavy flooding. I know. But in these areas that are experiencing these devastating floods at the moment, there just so happens to be certain counties, with this one right here in itself being Knox County. Now, this right here is an article from 2023, okay? And in this video, we'll be going over a series of articles ranging from 2023 to now in 2025. But as you can see, the Knox County Fiscal Court for up to $150 million of tax-exempt industrial revenue bonds for a large-scale what? Utilizing the company's proven and patented critical mineral refining technology. And as you can see, Mark Jensen, the CEO of American Resources Corporation, commented, "We put significant research into selecting a site to deploy our leading critical mineral refining technology for the production of what? Our Knox County, Kentucky site, strategically located in the heart of the developing U.S. battery belt, and also highlights the value of American Resources' broad infrastructure platform." That word being key, okay? But also saying we are also excited to again work with the Hilltop Securities team, given their impeccable execution on our previously announced Wyoming County, West Virginia, $45 million tax-exempt bond. All this information being provided from you, once again, from a 2023 article by 8 News Now. But fast forward to a 2025 article, Mark Jensen, like we mentioned already, chairman and CEO of the ReElement Technologies, states this development marks a significant milestone in American resources and ReElement Technologies' evolution, showcasing the versatility, flexibility, and scalability of our refining technology on the global stage. Saying we are excited to share that in our Noblesville, Indiana commercial qualification plant is producing and selling rare earth oxides to multiple U.S. customers. Very interesting U.S. customers, by the way. And demand has already exceeded current capacity, but we are excited about the expansion into our Marion, Indiana, and Knott County, Kentucky sites. I'm not going to say too much more about this because I'm pretty sure by now you get the point that I'm trying to make here. And if you don't, then I guess just keep confining yourself inside of that comfortable little reality of yours. Does nobody remember North Carolina?
In this next video, have you all heard the disturbing news story where police arrested a reported leader and 2 members of a cult-like Zizian group allegedly linked to ending multiple lives? Now, I'm reading this article from People magazine, which was published today, February 18th, but this arrest came around 2:30 p.m. local time, February 16th. These 3 individuals, Jack Amadeus Lasota, Michelle Jacqueline Zyko, and Daniel Arthur Blank, they face multiple charges, including trespassing, obstructing and hindering, firearm in a vehicle, resisting arrest, and handgun in person. They are currently being held at the Allegheny County Detention Center. The arrest came after some group members were allegedly involved in ending the life of United States Border Patrol agent David Malin in a shootout during a traffic stop in Coventry, Vermont on January 20th. The FBI said that an alleged 4th group member, Teresa Youngblood, was charged in ending the life of Malin, 44, alleged Zizian group member Felix Buchholz, 26. His life was also ended in that incident last month, according to the news outlet. But outside of ending the life of the Border Patrol agent, this group, like I said, is also connected to other horrifying crimes, like ending the life of a landlord, ending the life of other people, and also one of the group members, one of the cult members, Zyko, it is believed that she ended the life of her parents. But it's come out by investigators and multiple news outlets that multiple members within this group, I believe all the members in this group, have a very interesting background. And this individual on TikTok, Free Theory, has put a lot of great things together when it comes to this news story.
This whole thing is just insane. Now, if you missed my last video, we're talking about this Zizian group that took out an agent in Vermont near the border of Canada.
Authorities say the agent was killed in the line of duty yesterday on Interstate 91 in Coventry. As you see here, it's about 20 miles south of the Canadian border and about 100 miles southeast of Montreal.
Now, I laid out a bunch of details in my first video, but if you want a serious breakdown and all the details, this guy, Andy, he's a journalist on X, doing a phenomenal job. But I'm not a journalist, so let's get weird. Now, one thing I want you to understand is everybody in this group is basically a genius. Like the one that was taken out in the shootout was a math genius. But this one here, David Lasota, the leader of the whole Zizian group, was not only a math whiz and a genius, but interned at NASA as well as Oracle. Now, I went digging, and most of the members of this group also attended this Center for Applied Rationality. This is their website here, CFAR, Developing Clear Thinking for the Sake of Humanity's Future. Now, this place is weird all on its own, but basically they're using a set of techniques from math and decision theory for forming your beliefs about the world as accurately as possible. Now, like I said, it's a rabbit hole all on its own, but this is their logo right here. Does it look familiar to anybody else or just me? But anyway, now I showed you in my first video that this group was functioning out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Now, the fact of how insane this whole story is, and the fact that it was in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and if you don't know, there's a certain 3-letter agency that's been stationed in the University of North Carolina since the 80s. And why does that make a difference? Well, not only are these people geniuses, but they're right around the college age, and look at them. Anybody else thinking what I'm thinking? Really makes you wonder, especially with what happened in Indiana the other day. But I'll definitely let you guys know if I find out anything else. Stay safe.
In this next disturbing video, were you aware that there is such a huge bee problem, that there is such a shortage of bees? The media, they are not talking about this subject. There is a media blackout when it comes to this bee problem. Bees play such a vital role, not just for the environment, but for the earth as a whole. This video comes from Shep for the King on TikTok.
We got a problem. Commercial beekeepers are starting to pull their hives out. They're seeing that they've lost $150 million worth of bees, with bee producers losing, up to 50, some of them up to 90% of all the bees in their apiaries.
So why is nobody else talking about this? Where there was a letter that went out on the 6th of February from the U.S. commercial beekeepers reporting catastrophic hive losses of 50 to 100%. And apparently this is worse than the CC days. I believe that was back in 2008, where there was a colony collapse going on within the bee community. But immediate economic impact of $140 million, but will have a bigger and more profound impact on American food security in months ahead. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to read this entire letter, but you can go ahead and pause and read it for yourself. Again, if you want to, go ahead and pause and read. Now, what's wild is how there is a media blackout on this entire situation, but we have this right here. Urgent news: widespread colony losses are reported. Severe and sudden honeybee colony losses are being reported across the U.S. as beekeepers prepare for almond pollination. Surveys indicate losses exceeding 50% on average, with some operations experiencing up to 100% losses in the past year. So apparently this year, commercial beekeepers lost 80 to 100%. And it is being reported that this has never happened in the industry. And we can see down here how this mass die-off of bees will have a profound effect upon economics, ecosystems, and human health. And for those who are unaware and do not know, bees play a critical role in our ecosystem because bees are pollinators. They play a vital role in the ecosystem by helping plants reproduce. They are essential for food security, biodiversity, and the health of the environment. So they basically play the role of the foundation of our ecosystem. So you knock them out and then everything else will fall. Now, let me make something clear. I'm not trying to fearmonger. I'm just trying to present information.
So yesterday, I made a video where I included a segment where a meteorologist in Oklahoma, he witnessed what looked like, to him anyway, to be a UFO, but it looked very similar to these flying things that I have been talking about that have been witnessed ever since the April 8th solar eclipse. They kind of resemble flying snakes. I have also said in numerous videos that these things appeared during very big events. They appeared again during the April 8th solar eclipse. They appeared during a very bad tornado outbreak in the Midwest. They also appeared during a missile strike in Israel. Not just that, but they've also appeared, many of them appeared above the skies of California, Los Angeles, as the fires were raging. So I said that they kind of work like a Mothman of sorts. They appear whenever there's a disaster, or like I said, some sort of big event where there's a lot of energy and so forth. And now that one may have appeared above Oklahoma, we need to keep our eyes on Oklahoma. Well, this news story in Oklahoma has come out only a couple days after that meteorologist witnessed whatever he saw.
I don't hear anything, and something's moving in erratic ways. It's in the shape of a jelly bean, but the interior was like plasma. It was just going like this, you know.
Chris Frederick has been a teacher for over 2 decades, and he currently works for a metro area school district. He showed us this video from January 25th. He's in his driveway off Northwest 21st in the Gatewood district. He said it all started that night when his wife wanted to go to Brahms, so they walked out to their car. But after a few minutes, neighbors were calling each other.
He started calling neighbors, and before long, we were all standing out in the street and had our phones out.
Chris has been a drone pilot for about 10 years. He started working with them when he and his wife were realtors in Ardmore several years ago. He fired it up, and attempted to fly his drone to get a better look at the object.
The sky at night, you have to have aviation lights or it's not legal.
But strange things started happening.
My controller talks to me and it said unable to take off, electromagnetic interference.
After he recalibrated a few times, he eventually got it in the air and took these pictures of the object, which he estimates is around 1,500 feet off the ground. His drone was at about 400 feet when he took the pictures.
It concerns me that something was up there at night at that altitude that could have been a hazard.
He said his video function wouldn't work, which was odd. And there was something else. Only about 4 minutes and 18 seconds of flight time.
It had a fresh battery in it. It has a 35-minute flight life. And as soon as I took those 3 pics, my controller said a low battery, return to home.
Chris and his wife kept seeing that object for about 4 hours that night. We showed his pictures and videos to experts at OU for a second opinion.
What it is, I don't know, right? But I think I would approach this question as what is it likely to be, right? So that's where I'm coming from.
Professor Killick teaches astrophysics and cosmology at the university.
From the Plaza District, it's south of them because we can see the Orion constellation in the background, so we know their point of view.
He acknowledged the object looks strange, but ultimately, it's likely it's just another drone in the sky.
I could see a red streak. Now, I don't know if it's because I could imagine if it's a long exposure. I don't know if it is. I don't know how long the exposure was, but a drone could have a red light on top of it, right? I mean, our planes have red lights on them.
We took a look at the metadata or digital picture information of the drone pictures. You can take a look at that info for all the images right here in Oklahoma City. Jason Berger, KOCO 5 News.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this channel and you want to see more
I think it is really important that you understand there's a difference between what's right and what's wrong and what is the law. And that cannot be further from the truth with this particular story that I'm going to discuss. First, I want to start with the law. Let's start with the law and then get to the story so you'll understand where I'm going with this and what exactly is happening to this couple in Georgia. Let's talk about eminent domain. Eminent domain refers to the power of the government to take private property and convert it into public use, referred to as a taking. The Fifth Amendment provides that the government may only exercise this power if they provide just compensation to the property owners. Now, we need to ask the question, what is considered just compensation? A taking may be the actual seizure of the property by the government, or the taking may be in the form of regulatory taking, which occurs when the government restricts a person's use of their property to the point of it constituting a taking. So keep in mind that this is protected by the Fifth Amendment. Again, got to say that so you can see where we're going with this. Now, that's the law. Do I agree with the law? No, I don't. I think that once you own something, it should be yours. I don't think that the government or a corporation should be able to come in and take what you already own. But that is exactly what is happening to this couple in Georgia. And you guys have got to see this. Georgia family, they are fighting against a land seizure. Now, this couple, they have had this land in their family name for over 600 years. So the land has been passed down throughout the years, right? So obviously that's more than a lot of us, because a lot of us that are descendants of slavery, we just don't have that. We don't. A lot of us don't have land or didn't have land to pass down, but they did. Listen to what is about to happen to them.
Driving across their nearly 600 acres
Yeah, you can see a lot of trees over there. You see the tops of them.
never gets old for Blaine and Diane Smith. The history just as rich as the timber crops they've been farming.
We used to go down there. It's a special rock that we like to sit on.
Blaine's enslaved ancestors lived and worked on this Sparta land. Now, he and his wife own the very property. The family among the less than 2% of Black farmers nationwide.
My father farmed this land almost all of his life. My grandfather farmed it most of his life. He bought it back in the 1920s. During that time, he raised cotton, corn, peas, all kinds of vegetables. But it's still in the Smith family. Not one piece of it has gotten away.
Until this September, state leaders decided parts of the Sparta land are no longer theirs.
It's my property. You don't.
Pause for a second. Thank you for the correction, Ms. Kiwi. 600 acres, not 600 years. I'm so sorry. They've had the land in the family since the 1920s. Thank you so much for that correction. All right, let's go back in.
Have the right to take.
But a private company does have the right to take it, according to the unanimous vote from the Georgia Public Service Commission. The agency, comprised of 5 elected officials, oversees eminent domain. Eminent domain, the right of a government or its agent to appropriate private property for public use with payment of compensation. In Georgia, the process starts by first condemning the site. The Georgia PSC members agreed private company Sandersville Railroad could legally condemn 9 properties in Sparta, including.
Pause. So a railroad company has the right to condemn at least 9 properties in Sparta, Georgia. And this is according to the federal judge.
Including parts of the Smiths for the company's Hanson Spur project, a 4.5-mile spur connecting raw material producers to the CSX rail line in Hancock County. Essentially, hauling rocks that be used to build concrete. The company argues the train project will improve infrastructure. But
Lies.
Let's pause here and let's go back to that map. So basically what they are trying to do, this railroad company, Sandersonville.
These black people probably have no idea what's really under all of this land that they got. As soon as the government take the land, then they're gonna find out how valuable the property really is. What's really under it? Lithium? What?
Railroad. They are trying to build this railroad. If you follow the yellow line, you'll see this is the direction that they're trying to go in. And you can see the Smith family farm is right here. So this means that they're going to lose a portion of that land. But it also means something else. It also means that now there is going to be a railroad that goes through what was part of their property. And I want to be honest about something here as well. The reality is, if they ever wanted to sell that farm in the future, it may be difficult, because the reality is, folks, a lot of people don't want to live right next to a railroad. I know, I live next to train tracks. I lived in an apartment building many years ago with 3 roommates, and there was a train track right behind the building, and the train woke us up every night like clockwork. 3 o'clock in the morning, here comes that train. And a lot of people just don't want that. So that also makes me wonder if the property value would also decrease as well. Even the rest of the part that they would still legally own, it makes me wonder, would that make their property decrease in value? But the reality is, most people do not want to live right next to a damn railroad track.
Raw material producers to the CSX rail line in Hancock County, essentially hauling rocks that be used to build concrete. The company argues the train project will improve infrastructure, but the Smiths feel railroaded.
If you listen to the railroad folks, they say you're keeping your land. We just taking a little piece of it. To me, we've got somebody who's coming through it like they are. They're devaluing it. They're defacing it. They're creating hazards through it.
They are just one of at least a dozen local eminent domain cases in recent years, from Atlanta to Newton County. Current statistics are few and fragmented, but Atlanta News First Investigates found nationwide data. A 2007 study revealed when eminent domain was used for private development, it most often impacted areas where more than half of the community was made up of people of color. Nearly half of the area's population sat below the poverty line.
So that part right there is really important because most of these eminent domain areas are areas where, as they say here, people of color, but I would also add predominantly Black areas. So once again, what this means is that they would lose part of their wealth. And I have to ask this question, because if we're really thinking about it, because eminent domain still does exist and it is legal and apparently protected within the Fifth Amendment, do we really own what we think we own? Do we really own the land that we think that we own? Because if a corporation can come in and say, we need this part of your property to build such and such, and we'll just give you this compensation, do we really own the land if part of it can be taken away? And if we don't really own the land, then technically that would still make us tenants. That's something we really need to start asking. We really need to think about. Do we really own the land just because it says we're the property owner if the government can give the clearance for a corporation to come in and take part of it away? What do we really own? And to go along with that, this is how people lose generational wealth. This isn't the first story with a similar situation where I've discussed this before. 2 years ago, I covered a story about a 92-year-old grandmother in South Carolina that was being sued by a real estate development company because they wanted to take her land to build luxury condos on the land. Similar situation with the Smiths, where the land had been in her family throughout generations. And they sued her. She wasn't suing them. They were suing her. They were stealing the land from that woman. Like, this is insane. These are some of the ways that Black families over generations have lost their wealth. I always mention the 2008 housing crisis. That was a big part of it. But it's also issues like this.
In the city of Sparta, where the developers are building the railroad, census records show 51% of residents live in poverty, the median income at $22,000.
We're here in a county that really needs new opportunities, new job growth, new tax base.
The railroad company president, Ben Charbutton.
Have an annual impact of $1.5 million.
That could make sense for a struggling town. It's how the company has pitched the project to residents. However, Georgia law states economic development is not a justifiable reason to take property.
It really is not supposed to be factored into an eminent domain case.
Well, they go hand in hand. I talk about jobs because that's what really matters to folks.
Charbutton says the train would only travel one round trip per day, 5 days a week during daylight hours, that it would not be a nuisance to landowners.
That doesn't, I'm sorry, but that doesn't matter. Like, the reality is it's their land, or is supposed to be their land. And whether or not you think it's going to be a nuisance or not, that's really besides the point. Imagine if I came to your house, we'll bring up the Gaza situation in a second too, because I know someone mentioned that in the chat. That's a good question. Someone just said, do people in Gaza own the land that they have? That's a good point. But if I came to your house and I said, hey, that's a nice backyard you got there. I'm actually building, a development, and your backyard is kind of in the way. So I'm going to need part of that for this development. Oh, and by the way, it is really important for infrastructure. I can make whatever kind of case I want. And you lose part of your land. It happens. And it's been happening. And more people need to talk about this. I haven't seen too many, and we got to ask this question because, As much as people say that they're progressive and they care about progressive issues, I haven't seen white progressives cover this story. And I didn't see white progressives cover the story about the 92-year-old grandmother 2 years ago either. You know who I saw cover this story? Black people. Dana with the Data covered this story. And Dana with the Data is conservative. And she covered this story. Mark Lamont Hill covered this story. So I think we need to start asking some questions, because my whole thing is like, oh, you want us to come out when you need us to help get the vote, but you don't want to talk about any of these issues that directly impact Black communities. You're nowhere to be found. But you want us to come out and vote for those politicians who are allowing these things to happen and aren't doing anything in those Black communities. Something to pay attention to.
They feel like you guys are robbing them of their family legacy, of their family land.
Well, you know, I understand that, and it's the condemnation process is a last resort. We have had multiple conversations with the landowners.
While several other property owners made deals with the company, 3 families are holding out, including the Smiths, in part over fears if they give up land now, the company could take even more.
Would you guys come back and take more land?
Well, I don't know exactly who you're talking to, but everyone I've dealt with that's a landowner, we've had very constructive dialogue.
So would you take more land if you needed it?
No, we're very clear.
A claim the Smiths don't believe.
Because when they come and take that property, it's gone forever.
It's why the Institute for Justice now represents the families against the railroad.
The railroad's position is just that I'm a railroad. Obviously, I'm going to benefit you, and that's just not enough.
The attorney filed this appeal in Fulton County Superior Court, alleging the PSC improperly granted Sandersville's petition that the project is not economically feasible and may not be a legitimate public use.
What the railroad has shown is that this track, if it even comes about, is going to promote the profits and the cost reductions for a couple of private companies, and that's all.
The Institute for Justice is using this as a money-making venture for themselves.
My big question is, I'm reminded of East Palestine, Ohio. What happens if that train derails? You see this whole thing about, well, you know, it's just a part of their land that we want to take, and the train won't be a nuisance. What happened if the train derails? Trains derail in the U.S. all the time. I mean, the East Palestine one was a big story, but it happens more often than people realize. So if that train does derail, it could derail on the remaining part of their property. Then what? What if there's chemicals on the train when the train derails, just like East Palestine, Ohio? Now you got chemicals in the air in the neighborhood too, and the people will be pushed out. No one should have their land taken away. Now, to the person who was mentioning this in the chat, they said, do the Palestinians own that land in Gaza? That's a good point. No. As much as we've talked about Gaza and the West Bank and about Israel stealing their land, I thought it was important to cover this story because I want you to realize it happens in the United States too. Even in 2025, people have their land stolen. No matter how long it's been in their family for generations, they can just come in and take it. And I gotta say this part here, ladies and gentlemen. This is why, one of the reasons why I push back on that pull yourself up by your bootstraps theory. This is why I never co-sign that. Number one, everybody don't have boots or straps. Number two, most people do not get out of poverty, despite what people may tell you. They usually point to one person who made it. The majority don't. Poverty is a cycle that is very hard to break. That's just a reality. But number three, even if you do pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you get everything, you get the house, you get the land, at the end of the day, that don't mean anything because a corporation can come in and take your shit. This is why I always push back on the corporations and the billionaires, because ultimately they're the ones that are doing the most damage. They said the people in that neighborhood, the median income was $22,000 a year. So it's not like people there are living the Ritz. Think about what it would take for them to have to start over. Share this story with a lot of people, ladies and gentlemen.
Kofi, follow me.